Good evening, everybody. Turning a couple minutes late. Some of us have been driving around looking at transformer boxes. So we'll start off with a roll call. Terry, do you want to start at your end?
Trumbull here.
Siegel here.
Danaher here.
Forcell here.
Valentine present.
Johnston here.
All right. I'm going to change the agenda a little bit. We'll get the community comments just as we get to that agenda item. Shall we go to the minutes next? Any comments on the minutes for the last meeting?
I wasn't here, but I don't think you were either.
I wasn't either.
So I don't think you called the meeting to order.
Oh, all right. That's right.
Picky.
I'm pretty good though, but yes, we'll correct that. I didn't call the meeting to order. Any other comments on the minutes? Is there a motion to approve?
Move approval.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Lisa?
I wasn't there.
Oh, okay, all right. We'll call you as abstaining. Minutes are approved. We'll stick to the agenda item, except we'll go right now into oral communications. Most of them are about agenda item number 1, but to save Nicole Sankola from having to sit through all that, we'll start with her comment on agenda item number 2.
Good evening, Chair Danaher. Thank you very much. My name is Nicole Sankola. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency. And I have a statement here for you, but I want to read it and explain to you. BOSCA, if you're not familiar who we are, represents the interests of the 26 water suppliers who purchase water, 2/3 of their water produced by the San Francisco Regional Water System, which is owned and operated by San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, including Palo Alto. On July 6th, the State Water Resources Control Board released its draft final Bay Delta Plan update. If implemented, this proposal could seriously reduce water supply during the next drought, forcing severe water reductions to the 1.8 million residents, 40,000 businesses, and community organizations in Alameda, San Mateo, and Santa Clara counties, including Palo Alto. The State Board is required by law to regularly review the Bay Delta Plan, to update the water quality requirements in the San Joaquin Delta, and establish minimum water flows in major tributaries, including the Tuolumne River. BOSCA understands the value of the Bay Delta ecosystem and that the status quo is not sustainable. For this reason, BOSCA is working with other stakeholders to protect water quality in the Bay Delta for humans, fish, and other wildlife. BOSCA has been closely reviewing and analyzing the State Board's recent proposal for the Tuolumne River. Our analysis indicates that if this proposal is implemented, water users could be required to reduce average per person water use to 41 gallons per day during a drought, from the recent pre-drought levels of 79 gallons per person per day. And for some people in our communities, to 25 gallons per person per day. The severe water cutback would also threaten jobs, as businesses' activity might be reduced or prevented, and some businesses might have to move elsewhere. Community development might be delayed, and new housing might not be built. A community without enough water for jobs, growth, and fully operational businesses, hospitals, and public institutions is unsustainable. Fortunately, there is a good, reasonable alternative to the State Board's plan. The SFPUC has proposed, and BOSCA has supported, a science-based alternative that strikes a reasonable and sustainable balance between water supply reliability and increased salmonid population on the Tuolumne River. BOSCA and other water providers in this area have advocated for a voluntary, negotiated settlement to resolve these issues. Governor Brown has also expressed his support for this approach. A voluntary settlement agreement would be the most logical, helpful, and responsible way to proceed, rather than a unilateral order from the State Board. BOSCA supports the objective of the State Board's Bay Delta Plan. We oppose the board's proposed unilateral plan for the Tuolumne River, and we strongly favor the idea of a negotiated settlement for a responsible and sustainable path forward. Thank you very much. I'll leave copies of these for you.
Okay, thank you, Nicole.
Thank you.
So can I ask the chair if this is an appropriate time for a response?
Actually, this is, in the community comments, we're not allowed to make it a discussion item.
I thought it was on agenda item 2, the way you announced it.
Pardon me. Yes, it is. Do you want to wait till that item, or if you go ahead
No,
and
I
make a
think it's
comment now?
important to just
Okay.
say it now. It's pretty quick. Namely, I disagree. I'm very pleased with Ms. Sankula coming here in front of us, but I disagree with virtually every one of the implications that she said of this plan. And I'm pleased that our council is going to be discussing that. Mr. Shikata, do you want to just add in on that?
I think I can cover that under general manager comments,
Okay.
so I'll do so in a minute.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Terry. Why don't we go into general manager comments then?
Maybe less than a minute. Okay, I have a few items I'd like to make note of for the commission and public's information. First, related to the wildfires occurring in our region, in particular the Carr wildfire impacts on hydroelectric resources may not be top of mind, but in addition to the tragic fires as well as the concerns for the communities being impacted, there is a connection between these wildfires and our electric supplies received here in Palo Alto. Our staff has been working with the Northern California Power Agency, NCPA, to monitor impacts of the Carr fire in particular in the area around Redding. There is a relationship in that hydroelectric resource deliveries from the Western Area Power Administration, WAPA, and the Bureau of Reclamation Projects have been interrupted for several days while crews were gaining access to the facilities and restoring power facilities in the area. Reduced power deliveries to about 40% of what would have been expected were it not for the fire. These efforts for restoration are continuing and are expected to return to full electric delivery capability soon. Does not appear that the CAISO, the California Independent System Operator, has suffered operational issues as a result, but we will be monitoring and responding to any requests from CAISO for any emergency conservation flex alerts as may be necessary to respond to the emergencies. Also, in the area of prevention, closer to home, I would note that there is a new regulatory requirement for a wildfire mitigation plan, and so our utilities department here has been working on a consent calendar item that will be coming to the council on August 20th regarding the state of our wildfire preparedness and our electric utilities. The recent change in law mandates that each utility's governing body adopt a wildfire mitigation plan after determining whether there is an area within our jurisdiction, quote, at significant risk of catastrophic wildfire. And there are specific criteria and maps that the state has established for the potential for electric line or equipment-related emergencies. So our staff report will request the City Council make the appropriate designation in the foothills area, as well as accept our protocols for mitigating any potential for wildfires as well as prevention activities. To be clear, there is no new or enhanced risk of wildfire in an area, but this is simply meeting a regulatory requirement, and we'll be bringing it forward accordingly, working with our fire department. Another topic, our fiber to the node, fiber to the premises, request for proposal. The city received a number of proposals, 6 proposals for our request for proposal for a fiber to the node business plan, and we're now entering the phase of evaluation of bringing in proposals for presentations. Had been talking to the chair about potential involvement as observers and commenters from UAC members. So perhaps that's something we could discuss following my comments. And in fact, we can get into that in a minute. Next topic, SunShares. As the commission may recall, we participate in a regional solar group buy program, and that program has been reinitiated now for the 4th year in a row. City will be participating in this Bay Area SunShares, a solar and zero emissions vehicle group buy program administered by the Building Council for Climate Change, or BC3. Beginning today, August 1st, Bay Area residents can take advantage of discounts on rooftop solar and zero-emission vehicles from specific contractors and providers. The program runs for a limited time, only through November 15th, and information is available on our website, cityofpaloalto.org/sunshares, for details and to join us for a free workshop coming up on September 29th. Let's see, just a couple more items. One, the utilities awarded 2 climate protection grants from the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, or BACMed. Our utilities has been awarded 2 grants from BACMed, which will enable the city to offer a refrigerator recycling program and conduct pilot study on gas furnace replacements in multifamily buildings. Each program is designed to help the city save energy and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We'll provide additional information once the formal launch on those programs is underway. Then finally, to Commissioner Trumbull's point regarding the Bay Delta plan, we have received instructions from the city manager based upon council interest to bring forward the plan, which you may be aware has recently had a release of a supplemental environmental document, and will be expected to have additional discussion by the council during the month of August. We're currently working on trying to set the agenda that it will come forward, and we'll provide a confirmation to the commission once that's done. At this point, it looks like the 20th of August would be the date that we'll bring it forward for council discussion. And that completes my comments.
As mentioned, RFP, I noticed that I have a copy of the RFP request. There are 5 companies that would select to present the interview.
Oh,
I'm sorry, thank you. The 5 companies have been selected to present, and Ed has invited anybody on the commission who wants to sit through those interviews to do that. The issue from the city attorney's office is if you come to one, you've got to go through all 5. We don't want to show favorites or anything. I mean, those are on the 16th, 17th, and 18th. Is that right, Ed?
week of the 13th, do we have those specific
I'm
dates?
sorry.
13th in the morning.
Thir-
So it'll be the 13th in the morning, and then the 14th will be in the afternoon, and then on the 15th, it'll be in the morning. And there will be five vendors presenting.
Okay, all right.
And
So
do wanna-
nobody has to stick their hand up now, but maybe after the meeting, we can talk about if anybody wants to do that. A lesser alternative, which I may do, is to review their submissions ahead of time and let staff know if I have any particular questions that I'd like staff to raise with the consultants on that. So I'll send the RFP to Lisa and Lauren, and then we can talk afterwards. Oh, and you too, Jim? Okay. Great. Well, it's a interesting, complex, and technical and economic issues, so it'll be fun to dig into.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you, Ed, on that. Are there any commissioner comments? Okay. Very good. I will only say that the news on the climate change front has never been worse, and I feel very grim this week, and I think anything we can do on that score is very important. So with that, we'll turn to agenda item number 1. Yeah, I have a bunch here. All right. I'll just set the stage, then we'll have the community comments, then staff will present, then we'll have the discussion. Just to set the framework, beginning, about 45 years ago, the city started undergrounding power lines for different neighborhoods. And so far, about 25% of the city has been undergrounded right now. And those installations are aging, and the city's been starting to replace the transformers in chronological order of when they were installed. So one neighborhood's already been done, and the one that's subject of discussion tonight is the second one, and others would be scheduled in chronological order. When they were initially put in the early years, the city had the neighborhoods who participated pay 25% of the cost of the installation. In later years, the city did away with that requirement, but there was this cost share element early on. The city is going at a very slow pace on undergrounding the rest of the city. There's going to be one neighborhood every 3 to 5 years. I'm sure a lot of us would like that to go faster, but it's a very expensive process. Staff sent us pictures of transformers on Monday. Some of us are driving around this evening looking at neighborhoods that have them out there. So we're conscious of this. I'm also conscious of the benefit of not having the overhead lines, which I think is lovely when you don't have that. And I'm blessed to be in a neighborhood that doesn't have those, and I don't know when mine comes up for replacing transformers. So those are sort of the framework for this. One thing that came up in discussion was, since there's a big cost delta between undergrounding and overgrounding, whether that should be treated as a cost share. And so if people care to, when they make their comments, indicate if they feel their neighborhood or they be willing to participate pro rata in the extra cost of undergrounding. I think that would be interesting data for the commission as we discuss this report. With that in mind, since these were handed to me in different areas, I've just shuffled them. So if there's any particular reason for anyone to come first, speak up. Otherwise, I'm going to start off with Nina Bell.
If I might, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, as Ms. Bell comes up to the microphone, if I could make a comment
Please.
also. I definitely, on behalf of staff, would like to acknowledge the level of anxiety and somewhat unanticipated stress that this has caused, really to the neighborhood, and quite frankly, also with staff. This is certainly not a project that staff has undertaken in order to create any anxiety among residents, and in fact, is purely a project that was undertaken based upon staff's commitment to our mission to deliver safe, reliable, and cost-effective utility services. So while recognizing that, undertaken for the best of intentions, that the communication hasn't gone all that well in some instances, and some of the interactions with some residents have gotten fairly contentious. So really wanted to emphasize the fact that staff is not in any way attempting to do this over the objections or out of any expectations that that this is something that is to be done over the outside of the will of the community. So just really wanted to share that perspective as we get started. Once community members are able to comment, we do have a pretty comprehensive presentation that I think will provide some additional context and some options that could be helpful for the commission's discussion.
All right, thank you very much.
Is it on? There we go. Nina Bell, and I'm the person who sent you all those photographs with all the mock-ups. And I just want to make a correction. I think in my write-up about it, I said that I used 20-gallon cans. There were 32-gallon cans. I just felt like I wanted to get it correct. And hopefully you got all the photographs. Yes, thank you. As I was walking in tonight, I was chatting with someone and asked about the blue trees out front. And a word popped out from that person who said it was a desecration. And it really started me thinking about the word desecration, because after 45 years of living in this neighborhood with fully underground utilities, people who have bought in, some people recently paid $1 million and won over the asking price to buy into our little neighborhood. And to have an expensive house that you've just built with a 4-foot cube placed in front of your living room window is a desecration. And I would like to quote the comp plan that says the city strives to complement neighborhood character when installing streets or public space improvements and to preserve neighborhoods, the character of a neighborhood. We have lived 45 years with a character in our neighborhood of all substructure. And I thank the cue into the word desecration, so because it is a desecration to our neighborhood. You asked a question about would I personally be willing to pay in to have, and my response to that is, I want to see the budget, I want to see the accounting, I want to understand where the figures came from. So if we have asked those questions before of Mr. Shikata and Greg McKernan, we have gotten zero answers to all our questions. So answer that one, and then maybe we can honestly say, yes, I'll pay on the line. We need some answers, please. So thank you all for your time and your listening.
Thank you, Bill. By the way, I don't know if the numbers that we gave before building the presentation. Jeff Paul.
Well, Jeff's coming up. I just want to reflect that Councilman Filseth is with us.
Apologies for being late. So I think I will touch on matters other than aesthetics versus safety and so forth. When I read the staff report, I thought there were a lot of documents that were referred to that I couldn't find online. And if I had had time, I could have come to City Hall and asked for them and had them printed out at some time, but I didn't do that. One of those documents is Resolution 7580, which is the thing that council voted on that says, heck yes, we want to put these transformers above ground. Council did that on April 22nd, 1996. So I tried to find the minutes of that meeting, and I couldn't do it. I could find the week earlier, but not this particular meeting. Also, I couldn't find the staff report, and I couldn't find out if UAC had heard this issue before council considered it, and if so, when that was, and what the staff report was, and what UAC said about it. So all of that stuff might have been made more accessible by a more complete staff report for tonight. Also, I have a question. Is staff proposing to reuse the existing conduit in doing this refurbishing? What was the lifetime expectation for conduit in 1973 when they put the stuff in? What's the lifetime expectation for the conduit now? If the conduit's going to fail before everything else, maybe you should replace the conduit now too. But that might involve digging stuff up, which would be more expensive and make things uglier for a time. But if you dig stuff up, the city is working on a dig once ordinance that says every time you dig stuff up, put in conduit for fiber, which I would encourage you to do. If for no other reason, I mean, suppose we never get to fiber to the premises.
I didn't mention fiber, so thank you.
Well, you're welcome, my pleasure. But SCADA for the transformers might be real interesting, because the claim is the reason they fail is because over a period of time they run hotter than they wish they could run. And so it'd be like, it would be nice to be able to measure this over time. I think that's all I'll say tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. Alice Sklar. Oh, thank you.
Can you hear me? My name is Alice Sklar. I live at 632 Fairmead in Green Acres. I'm also the president of the Green Acres Improvement Association. I'm here tonight to represent myself And when I want to speak for the association, I'll let you know. The question about what to do about updating the utilities in Green Acres is of some urgency because, as already been mentioned, the utilities are over 45 years old. Therefore, in danger of breaking down, causing damage, injuring citizens, as well as interrupting our service for unknown periods of time. We are therefore eager to conclude the conversation with the Commission tonight and leave with a decision. My personal preference is for the conclusion to be to allow the Utilities Department to restore our service, which has always been entirely underground. I'd like to add, I was one of the families that helped pay for the undergrounding the first time around. The Utilities Department told Green Acres, one, that the department needed direction from you people, the Utilities Advisory Council, since existing regulations did not allow them to place utilities entirely underground as they had done many years ago. So we've waited to hear what you will suggest. Meanwhile, Green Acres residents have been meeting, talking, and researching the issues and coming to their own conclusions, which you will hear in no particular order. Please be aware that the Green Acres Association Board does not necessarily endorse the opinions that are expressed here tonight. What the GAIA Board wants from this evening is to leave knowing what evidence there is that, quote, having our utilities fully undergrounded is dangerous to us or the community. We understand that there are self-imposed regulations by which the Utilities Department operates, but that is not what we are asking. We want to know the actual science involved in the question. We want to know about safety and not regulations. Regulations can be changed, but science can't. Please don't disappoint us. In answer to your question about would I personally be willing to pay a cost share, yes, I would. I'd like to be convinced that that number is $3,600, but if that's what it was, I'd be happy to do that and move on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. But by the way, everybody's been very good about this. That was my clock going off. There's generally a 3-minute limit. We're not going to hold fast to it as long as we keep moving along, but I'm keeping an eye on it just in case. Eugene Lee.
Chairman Danaher, members of the commission, my name is Eugene Lee, and I'm a resident of Green Acres. Actually, I was here with my wife a few months ago as well at the meeting to express our opinions regarding the plan that's proposed to install the pad-mounted equipment. Obviously, our community has shared a lot of our concerns with utilities regarding this issue, and I'm not going to rehash them since there's a 3-minute limit. So I figured what I would probably do is just share with you a personal reason why. When I was a kid growing up in Pacifica, my brother and I played outside in the fog, and we used to have a pole-mounted transformer right outside our house. On foggy days, we'd hear a lot of these little hissing noises. It sounded really fun and friendly and very, very exciting sometimes to little kids who were just like 5 and 6. Then in 1980, my mother was diagnosed with cancer. Now, she underwent treatment for a number of years, and obviously it was a very painful process. That was also the time when the science started to discuss issues about EMF and what effects it could have on human health. So at the time, being young, we really didn't get involved in that kind of issues. But my parents nonetheless, at that point in 1985, 5 years after my mother was diagnosed with cancer, decided to move to a home. And when we moved, we made sure the home did not have anything overground. Everything was undergrounded. This was in San Francisco. We found a place. So we lived happily afterwards, and when I got married in 2000, my wife and I settled in Palo Alto. And one of the key criteria that we selected, why we selected our home in Green Acres, was because everything, including the transformers, were underground. And so for the last almost 18 years, we've lived happily in Nirvana, in Green Acres, And then one day this spring, we received a letter saying, basically there's going to be a discussion, I think a few days afterwards, just in March, that, we'll discuss the installation plan in August this year for boxes. And as you know it, there's a box right in front of my house. And actually, one other thing I forgot to mention is that my in-laws owned a home next to me. So actually, it's right in between our homes. And so, the funny thing is I've been in Palo Alto over 18 years. I've always wondered, I never knew this chamber existed until this year. And I've always wondered what it would take to get me here. Well, the answer is there's going to be a box that's probably about 4.5 feet wide and very tall, and something that causes me childhood fears. It's going to be installed within 20 feet of one of our bedrooms, if the plan is proposed. So, members of the commission, this is the reason I am here today, to share with you my personal story, and to urge you to ask the commission, ask the utilities to please reconsider their current proposal. Thank you.
Mr. Lee, thanks very much. Janine Chi? Janine Chi, okay.
Hello, hello, commissioners. My name is Janine Chi, and I live in the Green Acres area as well. I want to say that I feel the same. I share sentiment, Nina's sentiment. Although I live in the area for 10 of the years that she enjoyed for 40 years. And I feel like this plan that has been proposed is to modify my house without an agreement from me. And also, I was not given the compelling reason why it was done so. So if the proposal is adopted, I will feel very violated. As to the cost of the cost sharing of the undergrounding of the keeping the transformer underground, I feel over the years the city should have budgeted for maintaining the equipment underground, since it's already underground to begin with. I think the analogy is almost like you build a subway station and you have to plan a budget to maintain a subway station instead of maintain a bus station, and certainly not replace a subway train at the end of 40 years with some above ground buses. And I just want to share my sentiment with the commissioners, and thank you for your attention.
Mr. Chi, thank you. Garbo Lee?
Good evening. My
Hello.
name is Garbo Lee. My husband and I, Winston Lee, we're slated to have one of these lovely boxes right in front of our home, which is actually less than 20 feet away from our bedroom. So, but anyway, so I wanted to let you know we paid top dollar to move into that neighborhood. Our previous home had one of those telephone pole things like Eugene's home had, and when we found our next home in Green Acres, we were so thrilled. Just like you said, you felt blessed having underground utilities. We felt the same way, and we would like to maintain the current quality of neighborhood that we have and the current, utilities plan that we have. Because honestly, we got like a notice the day before that, there was going to be this pad mount construction coming up, and then fortunately our neighbors noticed it, like, oh, they're supposed to do this on Monday. What? Today is Friday. That's like, what, 2 days from now? And so we were quite surprised to find this letter. But anyway, so we're very grateful to our neighbors to have pointed it out, and since then, the core people that are supposed to have all these 8 boxes or however many they are, and the switch boxes, we have all come together, and we have met in my home, in our home, twice now, at least, and we've talked on other occasions. We maintain communication about this, and we really would prefer to stay blessed, as you have said. We really like it a lot. And I think you asked if we paid, how we felt about paying. Well, I understand Mrs. Sklar said she paid $500, and there was another, we had a meeting with Mr. Shikata, I can't remember when it was, But there was another party there. They said, we've already paid the $500. Why are we paying again? You know, we've paid for utilities. When we purchased the house, when you buy a house in Palo Alto, we spent years searching for the house. And when you spend years searching for the house, not only are you spending that time searching for the house, you're also spending top dollar to even get a house, which we did, okay? I mean, I think everybody who buys a house in Palo Alto does that. And when we pay for that, I think we're paying for whatever the previous owner, they paid for that, and that was part of our purchase price. So when you're asking us, like, do we want to pay another $3,500, and we pay a lot of taxes to be in Palo Alto, we're wondering, where's the money? We pay you a ton of taxes. I've been living in Palo Alto, I don't know, like 20-something years. We've paid our taxes. Why do we need to pay to replace light substructures? I don't understand that. So if you're going to ask me personally, my family, we would prefer not to pay. And we would prefer to maintain our current quality and, as you said, to stay blessed and enjoy the neighborhood just like you have. So thank you for listening.
Thank you. Ms. Lee. Michael Morier.
My card came in last. I'm happy to have others speak.
Oh, all right, then we'll put you at the bottom of the pile. So, Frankie Farhat.
I think there are some other owners who have had the box installed in front of their houses. I would like to let them talk first. Anybody else?
Well, I have cards from Yu Fang, Stuart Kreitman, Frankie Farhart, and Michael Morier, and I think there's one other in here. Lynn Liu. Yeah. And which one are you? You. Okay, great. Yu Fang. Yeah. Okay, great.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and the committee members. So my name is Yu Fang. My family live on Los Palos in Greenacre neighborhood. So just want to share a few thoughts from me and my family on this issue, and we really would like the committee to support us to maintain the underground utility that we have. So about 10 years ago, my family moved into this neighborhood, right? So as you all know, the reason that we moved into that neighborhood is because, it's so beautiful, it's so quiet and tranquil, and we feel really safe for the kids to live in that neighborhood, right? And about 5 years ago, our family, we remodeled our house, right? As part of the architecture review phase, the city has went through very extensive review of the plan, and one of the very important criteria is that we have to maintain basically the characteristic of the neighborhood when we're remodeling, right? And we are very happy to comply with that. So therefore, we're honestly very shocked when we heard that the city, the utility wants to dramatically change it, right, by moving this utilities suddenly above ground. Right, so therefore, that's something that we felt very disappointed about, and we hope that that decision can be reversed. Right. Secondly, this underground utility was installed 45 years ago, and over that period of time, it has operated without any major incidents. Right. So we are, and also in this new age where you have subways everywhere. Right, so we're wondering why suddenly there's a reason that we have to move everything above ground. The technology has evolved so much that something that we can do 45 years ago, why we cannot do it today, right? So we felt that there's no strong reason to move it or change it, right? There should be a way to preserve what it is if we can do it 45 years ago. So lastly, just about the procedural side, as some of the neighborhood mentioned earlier that, about 2 days ago, we got informed that the utility wants to make this change and they're going to start the work, which is absolutely shock to all of us, right? So in the last couple of months, we had some dialogue with the utilities, and we were promised that this is not something that will be forced upon us. There was going to be discussion, there's going to be dialogue. However, when we see the report, we didn't find any representation of what we're thinking in that report and what our opinions are in that report. And we also have not received any of real data to back up the recommendation from that report. Right, so therefore, because of that, I think we are all very united on this issue, and we really hope that the committee will support us on this.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let's see. Lynn Liu, is this okay now? Oops.
Thank you. My name is Lee Neo. I moved to Palo Alto a few years ago. Moving to Palo Alto is definitely a dream come true for me, my family, my children. We love the city, love the neighborhood, love the street view, basically everything. So when we heard about the project, we were very concerned, so we wrote a lot of letters. We tried to meet in person with the city to express our concerns. We asked questions. We would like to see some data analysis. I was in those meetings. We were promised that the city won't force it on us, but from the proposal as it is, that's what the city is just doing that. So I'm very surprised and very disappointed. And also, none of the questions have been answered. We haven't seen any research, any data, just we have the safety concern, just to name one. We all have children. We are next door to Terman Middle School. The marching band march in our street all the time. It's just a lot of things. In terms of the cost, I literally paid millions to buy the house and rebuild the house. I don't think it's fair for me to pay before the questions we asked got answered. Then I cannot answer that question. I don't know what I'm paying for. I think the city should have budget to cover this. Again, I would like those questions we ask to be answered before we answer that question. Better understand what we are paying for, why we need to pay for that. Thank you.
All right. Ms. Liu, thank you very much. Stuart Kreitman? Okay, great.
Give me a second. Good evening, Commission. My name is Stuart Kreitman, resident of Green Acres since 1991. I'm trying to be neutral and objective about this issue. As an engineer, I defer to the experts in the matter, the power engineers. But I would like to be able to correlate the documents I'm reading for accuracy. And we received a letter from Ed Chicada about a week ago, and there's a backtrack a little bit. There is a recurring theme here that the neighbors are not getting their questions answered. They're not getting a clear understanding of issues of safety or capacity, or what the technical aspects of this decision are. They're also not getting a firm understanding of the costs involved, whether it's their obligation to pay, those sorts of things. So I read Ed Chicada's letter pretty carefully, and I read the documents, I forget what RR, I was abbreviating myself, but I read the resolution 7580 and the RRs from 1 to 20, and I would like to assure that future conversations about this are done with the I's dotted and the T's crossed. One small example of a potential disagreement or inaccuracy that I'll give you is a reference to a special facilities fee in Ed's report on page 5. In RR 20.J.1, I read, special facilities are facilities requested, blah, 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 by an applicant. Just to be brief, special facilities do not refer to transformers or infrastructure that are shared by people. Special facilities refers to the utility point of entry at a person's house. So it doesn't seem like raising that that dot connects to the cost of transformers. Basically, in a conversation longer than 3 minutes, we could discuss how accurate the information given to us is. And I would like to just hone it so that the things that are said verbally correlate precisely to the things that are written. That's it. Thanks.
All right. Mr. Crankman, thank you. Frankie Farhat?
Hello, dear members of the Commission. My name is Frankie Farhat, and I'm a resident of Green Acres 1. Although no transformer is supposed to be installed in front of my house, I'm very concerned by this project, as some of you already know. And I'd like to propose maybe a solution to reduce the friction between the city, the utility department, and our neighborhood. Nina mentioned that we fully embrace the comp plan. I don't think I need to state it, but basically you're trying to provide us with functionality, capacity, and at the same time you're also considering the beauty of our environment and the character of the neighborhood. And this is all great. And we also appreciate the proactiveness that the utility department is showing by considering our neighborhood. However, I would like everybody, I think you understand it by now, but our neighborhood is very different from most neighborhoods in Palo Alto. Most neighborhoods have poles, they have wires, they have cables that go through trees. There are all kinds of issues. And certainly those kinds of improvements that you're trying to bring to the city would be great improvements from a functional standpoint as well as an aesthetic standpoint. We at Green Acres 1 are totally different. We don't have poles, we don't have lines between the trees. We are happy, and we have the capacity that we need so far. We don't have any reliability problems. I mean, it's almost paradise for us. So any change that would be implemented on us, especially those that have been presented to us in documents, would be negative. It would be a drawback compared to where we are. And so what I would like to say is that let's not rush things. Thank you very much for putting Green Acres 1 at the top of your list in your heart. But, we are very honored of being there, but I'd like to take a step back. We would prefer to see your upgrades implemented in some other neighborhoods before us, neighborhoods that would be able to benefit from the functional improvement and the aesthetics improvement. In the meantime, let's wait, put us back a little bit on the list, give us some time to maybe get together so that we can find funding, one way or another, to keep everything underground, or maybe find also some time to look into some points that seem very important to me, the points that were brought up by Stuart Kreitman and by Joel Hall, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm not mispronouncing his name, and get answers to many of the questions that have been raised today. So thank you for putting us at the top of your list, but let's take a step back. Let's find something that may work better for everybody.
All right.
Thank you very much.
All right, Michael Morier.
Good evening, folks. I'm having a terrible time hearing because I'm partly deaf, so if you'd speak up a bit. I'm Mike Morier. I live at 646 Fairmead. The 27 or 30-page letter that you got was largely my fault, and I apologize for it. I hope you did read it, but I apologize if you did.
It's in our package.
Waited all the way through it. This is an odd one. Our little neighborhood is known as Fort Apache in my own mind. If we don't have something going on Arastradero, we have something going in the creek. If it isn't the creek, it's Termit. If it isn't Termit, it's the hotel. You know, the Apaches circle us fairly regularly, and we've been through several little outings, and some ended well, some ended poorly. This one was a surprise, however. I don't think I've seen one that was as suddenly and abruptly presented as this one, let's put it that way. And it was a deep shock. In all the years I've been in various aspects of government and consulting service, I've never seen anything communicated like this, or frankly, as poorly. That is a double shock. To date, pretty much all of that served to encourage the waivers. Had they any questions or doubt, or were trying to be fair or rational about the possibility of there being anything wrong with the problem they didn't see, that pretty well has consolidated into, I wouldn't say unanimous, I got in trouble for saying that once. Not unanimous, there's always a few, but pretty overwhelming opposition to this. Mostly because we didn't get information or questions answered in anything approximating a timely manner at any stage of the proceedings. In fact, it got worse to the point that my confidence, at least in what I was hearing in the information, simply dwindled to zero, and I think that has been shared by everybody. There are several questions that didn't get answered, and one of which was, why us? We don't have a problem. How come we're first on the list? Everything's already underground, and I thought that was the general trend from what I've been reading in the city, to underground or otherwise big fire, whatever. Ultimately, what I came up with as my own rationale in the absence of any other input was, maybe it's just convenience, easier to drive up in a truck rather than lift the grate and blow the leaves out. They're opening gratings and they get leaves in there, and have a look and shut up and go off. Unfortunately, that didn't really take any of our considerations into account. That might have been a convenience, but we didn't hear any other rationale for the whole business at any stage in the proceedings, and pretty soon we gave up trying and went to the UAC. It seems to me that this whole proposal, which came out of left field and still hasn't been rationalized in any manner, shape, or form to anybody's satisfaction that I've heard, basically flies in the face of the comprehensive plan impetus to preserve the neighborhood character. Our neighborhood character depends practically wholly, our little ranch houses depend on underground utilities. That's it. That's all we got. Otherwise, we just have a bunch of little ranch houses on the south side of Arastradero. When that goes, urban blight and ranch houses. So this kind of struck the nature of our identity and the intent of the comprehensive plan to preserve the character and integrity of the neighborhood, I thought. What we didn't get at any stage in the proceedings in the way this has all gone down is any indication of any flexibility unless we fought very hard and complained vigorously. We're hoping you'll show more flexibility with respect to this particular neighborhood. We don't know why we're on the list. Were it I would look for one of three outcomes as a way we can all back off from this. Take us off the list. Until we have a problem, just take us off the list. I don't get the sensation from the Utilities Department that's probably going to be something they'll be very thrilled with. The second option might be take us off the list until you can find a way to pay for it. The question of paying for it came up this evening, and my answer would be we have received no cost justification for the numbers we have seen. There has been no breakdown, no discussion. We're presented with a number out of the air under duress when it became apparent that maybe we had been initially told we can't replace these things underground. It has to be above ground. That's it. One size fits all. We're out of here. Then it developed, well, maybe if we paid for it, maybe we could do that. But it was going to cost us $3,500 a house is the number we heard bruited about. But from where? Never heard anything. So I'd be very reluctant to pay for it. I'm capable of paying for it. I'd be willing to pay for it if I see any justification. The third option then might be take us off the list until we can figure out a way to pay for it. I've heard nobody other than a few possible suggestions from budgeting people saying, if we have to pay something again, which goes against the grain of those who paid initially and already purchased this, and those of us who paid for it, the cost of the homes we purchased, if we have to pay for it again, how could we do it creatively and avoid the cash flow hit of a $3,500 lump sum? That feels to me a lot like an attempt to divide not everybody in our neighborhood, despite the myth.
We're well over the 3 minutes, so we'll keep on, but wrap it up soon if you can.
Yeah, not everybody's going to be able to pay $3,500 lump sum over time, stretched out over a considerable distance if we arrive at a figure that anybody believes. I think a number of people in the neighborhood would pay, but as things stand, would you pay for a pig in a poke? We have no idea what we're paying for. So that would be the issue of paying. I hope that the third way out of this morass is to take us off the list until we have had a series of discussions and negotiations with credible parties, one would hope, and we can find a way out of it. And I hope you will be flexible enough to embrace one of those three options. Take us off the list, take it off the list until you can find a way for pay for it, or take us off the list until we get some answers, and we have had none. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Morier. And we had one last one that came in from Debbie Chausson.
Not good at speaking. My name's Debbie Chasso, and I've lived, can you hear me?
Yes, yes. You can pull the mic down a little bit.
Oh,
so
here
it's
it is.
close to you.
I'm here. I've lived, we bought into Green Acres 1 in 1986, I think, have raised our kids there. So I'll try and get this all in quickly, give some time back to Michael, who, I appreciate what everybody said, but Michael, really, you were just, I can't find you. It was, I think he spoke to a lot of things impressively, okay? My background, I'm an epidemiologist. I've worked at the Electric Power Research Institute. I don't know generation, storage, or even modern technology, so I do want to say that. However, I worked in health effects, okay? So what we are is a living historical cohort, as if a study were conducted. We have 45 years that show no neighbor health effects. When we first met with Mr. Shikata, thank you for your time, at Alice Sklar's house, we asked, has any employee been hurt? And you guys said no. We've also had incredible service, thanks to the utilities, and we've had unbelievable equipment durability, okay? So I'll stop with that point. We have a neighbor and I walked down Donald, which that's Green Acres 2, and they have pad mounts. And I saw a very big warning label, sign on the front of it that says danger. I don't know, get off, keep off, and it has a stick figure being electrocuted, falling off a stair. Okay, and then there's something else, keep out, a separate sign. So
I drove down Donald this evening. I missed that one.
Okay, it's 4177 Donald, okay? If you want to write that down. Okay, so in terms of safety, you want a comparison. So we've got 45 years of safety, and as far as I can tell, and I did ask the utilities staff, there is no data on the safety of pad mount transformers, okay? I couldn't find any. Maybe I didn't search the right journals, okay, but I found no information, okay? Next, we just got the conclusion from CAL FIRE in terms of the, I think, 11, 12 fires in the North Bay, and they found PG&E extremely, highly, whatever, financially liable and potentially criminally liable for violations and for vegetation growth, and I guess it was the pole and wire type of electric power delivery. Okay, so it got me thinking. I mean, we're all at risk of fire. I think fire has replaced earthquakes as the #1 fear in natural disasters or unnatural. It just makes sense that the safest type of location of a transformer is underground. Okay, I don't believe in that. These kinds of fires that a pad mount would be any safer than a pole and elevated transformer. Okay, I'm sorry.
All right, so we're well over the 3 minutes, so
I'll stop.
you can finish up, but
Okay, we pretty recently learned that there are 17 other districts or neighborhoods that apparently have underground utilities and are slated for pad mount. So my question to the staff is, are they apprised of the pad mounts? I mean, it was way too late for us to even try and communicate with them. We don't know who they are. But we were told that what happens for us will happen for them. And it's too late we can't communicate with them. And that's my only question. Other than that, Ed, you, and I don't know if Greg's here, and we've appreciated you guys. You've had grace in terms of all the questions we've put at you, and we don't, as far as paying, I'd be willing, once I see a cost analysis.
Okay. Great. Ms. Johnson, thank you very much. All right, we've heard from everybody in Fort Apache, I think. So delighted, really appreciate all that. And also, although people feel emotional about this, everybody's been so courteous. I really appreciate that as well. Ed, why don't we let your group present, and then we'll have time for discussion.
Great, we'll do. Let's get to it. Let's lead off with Debbie Lloyd, our acting assistant director for engineering, and be followed by Greg McKernan, our senior engineer involved.
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners, Vice Mayor. Okay, so I'm going to start off our presentation here, and Greg and I are just going to kind of tag team. So when we start talking about the engineering stuff, I'll let him take over. So, got it there? Okay, I'll take it from here. So the outline of what we're going to talk to you or show you this evening, we'll do some history of the underground districts, and including Greenacres. Just walk through some of the current status of undergrounding in the city, and again, in Greenacres. We'll talk about our current design practices and standards and explain some of the reasoning behind those standards. There is, an alternative that we can think of here that would take a policy change. And also we've got just some basic numbers on cost comparison. We've heard a lot about wanting the breakdown, but at this point, we don't have designs. So we were just trying to get rough estimates, and of course, those estimates will depend on, what the construction costs are when we finally get there. So something about the history. Chair Danaher gave some kind of background at the start here, but the program actually started in 1965, so it has been going on for quite some time. We currently have 43 underground districts completed since 65. The latest one is actually number 46. We've kind of skipped some order in the last few projects, so things don't always go kind of timely, that they go in chronological order of their numbering. We are currently waiting for a few customers to finish their connections for District 47, and we've just started construction on District 46. The undergrounding also includes all the electric, fiber, cable, and telephone systems. And to do this, we coordinate jointly with AT&T and Comcast. So that coordination with outside utilities is kind of like some of the reasons that we might have delays. They also participate in the cost for that. And it is still funded jointly between the utilities and property owners. So property owners do pay for their own underground connection costs. And then depending on how the district is formed, they may share the costs of the undergrounding the system also, still.
Sorry to interrupt, but can you give us some sense of the cost associated with when a district is undergrounded today? What it costs the residents for each of the items?
I'm trying to think, 47, I think they were around about 4,000. Between 3 and 5,000 for the customer's service connection.
And then possibly additional
yeah, actually I don't know. Do you know the budget for 47? It would depend on, it would be take it back. So for 47, there was no other cost associated to the customers, to the residents.
But that's on the order of $4,000 per resident, all in to take the wires which were previously up on poles, dig up,
No.
put everything underground? No.
No, that 3,000 to 5,000 is just for their service connection. From the utility system to their property.
And they don't share, sorry, and they don't share in the cost of digging up the street and putting the poles underground, the wires that were previously on poles underground?
Not for 47.
Okay.
If we had another district like Green Acres, where it was deemed to be not of wide public benefit, but local benefit, then there would be some cost sharing for the actual undergrounding of the system. So we touched on that. So with Green Acres, so this was one of those districts that was petitioned by the residents back in January 1972. And at that time, so we can see what's happened with the costs, it was around $300 for their service connection, and their share, which was 25% of the cost, was $310 per lot. So that was the 25% of the full cost of the actual utility undergrounding portion, 25% assigned to the residents. And at that time, our own crews did the construction, and as everyone has pointed out, they still have that original equipment there, and it has been working for the past 45 years. So where are we on the status of undergrounding? So I hear a lot of numbers around the city is 20% undergrounded, or 25%, or 50%. It really depends on what you're looking at. So if you look at our distribution lines, so our primary distribution lines, we're actually just over 60% of the city's primary distribution lines is undergrounded. And that is mostly, the majority of that is in commercial areas, commercial districts of the city. Approximately 2,500 residencies are in districts or areas that are undergrounded. And so they went from the conversion from the overhead to the underground system. And moving forward, all new developments, so all new housing subdevelopments or subdevelopments will be are built with the underground utilities. That leaves about 14,000 homes, residents in Palo Alto that remain to be undergrounded. So they're still served by the overhead lines, and they have the poles and the wires in their neighborhoods. So I hope that kind of helps with, is it 50% or 25%? It's a much smaller percentage if you just look at it about residents that are served by an underground system.
Could I ask a question about when you do new construction and you say it's underground, the utilities you put underground with new construction, are the transformers pad mounted in that situation, or are the transformers also underground?
They're pad mounted, unless it's just infeasible, which I don't think for residential areas have we ever had an issue where we've needed to, yeah. So in some of the really built up commercial areas, there might just be no physical space to have a pad mount.
In the commercial areas, though, you have like a fully solid concrete vault generally, right? When you go underground.
Chairperson, when we do our underground design for our distribution system, there's the conductors which carry the power to the transformers. The transformers are pad mounted, yet we still have vaults that allow us to splice the cable and make the pull the cable, splice it, and so that's what we use.
Yeah, I think just sort of thinking of it from the point of view of the large number of people here tonight and the 11 that spoke to us. If I'm trying to imagine why I ought to take on board that in a densely situated commercial instance, you might put a transformer underground, and yet in all the other residential instances and most of the commercial ones, you put them above ground. What I've encountered in modern commercial construction is it is a very significant concrete vault where you do elect to install a transformer, one that could be significantly larger than anything we've seen in any picture here tonight. And so I'm wondering if, when you've put transformers underground in commercial buildings, whether that's where you've elected to do it and how that's ended up being permitted, or whether, yeah, you've snuck some transformers into smaller vaults on an exception basis.
So I think the thing is that your point is well taken, is that if it goes to an existing, like, say, like out to the research park, all right, so we're going to take that for instance, there's property out there that we're going to put a pad-mounted transformer, a large one in place, and then we'll underground it going into wherever the demarc is to the building. Now, we take the downtown area where we don't have that space, then at that point, there's nothing we can do except put it in a large vault that's going to be undergrounded in the street location then at that point. And they're fully concreted at that point.
Right, and I think it might be helpful for everyone to understand how big those vaults can be in terms of because we've talked a lot about where's the world come to in 2018. Those vaults, in my mind, are much bigger than they used to be to help address a number of safety concerns around access.
Yeah, those vaults sometimes are 6 by 4, 6 feet by 4 feet. We also have larger ones out there. We've got switches and transformers that could be probably anywhere 8 to 10 feet, 10 by 13. So yeah, you're talking this big, a large room then at that point in the downtown areas.
Going back to the Green Acres area, so that was installed, our equipment there was installed in 1972 to 73, so it is 45-year-old infrastructure. Our expected life for the infrastructure that is in the ground there is 35 to 40 years for the cable and 15 years for the transformers. So we are, quite a way past the expected life in this community. We understand that they have not had issues and outages yet, but that's not, we run our system, we manage our system, we design it to replace before failure. So we don't wait for things to start failing before we replace them. We do it based on expected life, experiences with similar equipment in similar areas to give priority when we see we have old equipment assets out in the system. Generally, what engineering experience is sorry, did you have a question?
Well, I don't know if it's better to sort of interrupt as we go or whether I ought to. That would be fine. But I think, again, I just ticked off points where I think some of the questions I can relate significantly to that I'd be asking as well. I'm like, well, my transformer's made it 45 years. What's the problem? Let's go for 60. And so maybe some things that might be available are what's the average lifetime of an underground transformer compared to the average lifetime of a pad-mounted or pole-mounted transformer. For what it's worth, the transformer in my backyard up on a pole very clearly got very hot ones. As things that have gotten hot that are metal, we all know what they look like. Transformer failures aren't any fun. I'll wait, and I have a few thoughts to share about that a little later. But related to that, it might also be important to think about, are transformer lifetimes and failures proportional to the load or how hard we make them work? I'm pretty sure that it is. And I think that a problem we all have to think about is as we add EVs in our neighborhoods, because we all are here and there, we're increasing the loads on all those transformers. And so it could be that our statistics on transformer lifetime today will not represent our statistics on lifetime for transformers in a fairly short amount of time.
Correct, and absolutely on the loading as well, which probably explains why this equipment has lasted as long as it has in this neighborhood. It hasn't been fully loaded or highly loaded at all. And so going back, yes, we can't say when it's going to fail. I mean, that's the thing. We're talking about probabilities here. And all we know is that the longer past you go, the longer you are past the expected life, the probability of failure increases. And engineering experience is when you start to get equipment failure, it's not going to be like a one occurrence. It will start to be many occurrences. That's just what we try to prevent from happening.
But do you have I think we've talked before about the ones mounted above ground last, I think we had it in an old report, maybe 6 months ago, where you had some nice numbers on a pole-mounted transformer. Typically, an average lifetime will be 50 years. An underground transformer, an average lifetime would be 15 years. And I forget the exact numbers, but I remember we had those in one of our reports. I think that would be a very useful set of data, because I think that if it is the case, the Green Acres transformers have lasted longer because the load in that neighborhood happens to be a little on the light side relative to the capability of those transformers. If they were up on poles and they were the same size, they would last even longer. And maybe what happened, if we go back and look at the engineering drawings, is maybe the ones we put underground were really big. And then it's just so happened that those vaults never flooded out, and so they've never failed. But I think that might be a nice set of data. Maybe that's might take a little time to kind of pull it forward, but I remember we had some nice numbers maybe 6 months ago.
Yeah, and I do believe that was in the presentation we did for the community. Did we have that table? I think we had that table you're referring to that just does the comparisons of underground, pad-mounted, and pole-mounted.
Right.
So yeah, we can definitely share that again. Just to pull this back up to the system again, this actually is not the first underground district that we have rebuilt. We've rebuilt many of them over the years. We actually started this back in 1995 with the old Adobe Old Trace area. So we have been replacing underground districts, and I think the most comparable to District 15 would be Districts 6 and 7, which were also primarily residential, and went from the all underground equipment to the pad mounted. So we have been doing this. This may feel like it's something quite new, but we've been doing it since '95.
Could I just ask, how many of the underground utility districts have you rebuilt at this point?
So I think that it's the two that are just primarily residential. We've done a lot more of the commercial rebuilds. I would say we've actually been collecting this data together, but I would say we've got at least a dozen.
Okay, but you say there are two that are primarily residential, 6 and 7.
Yes.
Just
correct.
Where are those generally?
6 and actually, then we can go back to, yeah. Oh, no. Oh, sorry, I was coming up to it. Yeah. Can we spot 6? So 6.
Right corner, right
So
below.
6 is close. Yeah, 6 is close to District 15. You can see it just in the lower.
District 7's not shown on the map.
Oh, 7's not on this map.
I'm sorry, where, I didn't see 6.
So 6 is,
Okay, I see.
so right in the bottom right-hand corner, there's 16.
Okay.
And then, is that 6 or 4? That's 6. Sorry, I cannot. 7's not on this map.
So,
Is it south?
It's south.
It's a little bit further south.
And did I understand you correctly to say that in all of the rebuilds, you've put the transformers, they're pad mounted, none of them were replaced with?
In some of the commercial districts where it was not possible, there was no space available for pad mounted, we may have replaced them with,
But everything else has
below
been
ground.
pad mounted?
Yes.
But just to belabor the point a little bit longer, in District 6, which is,
That's Douglas, where you visited earlier
Douglas.
tonight, or those of you who did.
okay, and they went from
sorry,
having
Donald.
subsurface mounted transformers to pad mounted transformers. And when did that happen?
Several years ago.
Several years ago?
Sorry, District 6 was, I've got 2003, but they're saying 2001.
Oh, so quite some time ago?
Yes.
Okay, and when that happened, was there similar controversy, or is there anybody
I don't
here
know
who
that
can
any
speak
of
to
us
that?
were around at the time.
Okay. And was the number of pads required similar?
I'm sure it must have been.
Right, because for Green Acres, it's like 8 pads for approximately 140 houses, if I have that right?
I don't have the numbers for, but it looks, just looking from the area, it looks like a similar size area.
Okay, and the technology hasn't changed enough that the configuration would be significantly different between now and 2001 or 2003, whenever it was?
Correct.
So the pads I saw in District 6 might seem smaller than what is being described. What are they?
So,
I don't want to get ahead of things. Questions I want to get, what are the dimensions? Are there smaller versions available?
we can,
Yes, we'll go get into it, certainly.
We can get into it. If, remind me if we don't cover that exactly. So let's see, I jumped over here. So this was just to give you, so as we've said, there have been rebuilds going on, including a couple in residential areas. Coming up, we've identified 13 districts for rebuilds. Now, obviously, in a few years' time, there'll be more coming up, but these are basically the remaining districts that will reach end of life of the equipment by 2024. That represents about 1,700 properties, many of which are residential, but some commercial and multi-residential buildings as well, and about 270 transformers that will be replaced. We've identified 7 districts in our current 5-year CIP, and that's about 860 properties, again, primarily residential, and 120 subsurface transformers. And we currently have 5 that are in design, which includes District 15. So we've got 15, 16, 20, 23, and 30. 30 is kind of like jumping ahead a little bit because in this area we're also doing a 4 to 12 volt conversion. So it makes sense to put that work together. So of those 5 that we have in design, we're looking around 785 properties and about 100 subsurface transformers to be replaced. And at that, I will turn over to Greg.
Thank you. So when we put together our design for a new or rebuild of underground districts, we look at a couple key features. Number 1 is safety. Employee safety is one of the things that we look at very importantly for our operations group. Safety comes into play when we have working clearances on subsurface or below ground equipment. Some of the boxes are 4 by 6. We have high voltage cables in there. And to operate those, our crews use hot sticks that are insulated to remove elbows, connections that are energized sometimes. We need a lot of clearance. We usually need, those sticks are about 8 feet long. And so in order to get that clearance, depending on how we get the load break elbows in there, the switching units, it doesn't give us a lot of clearance for our crews. In addition, the pad mounts, they have clearance in front because we can operate from a safe distance. The reliability of this system is that when we have subsurface equipment, it's in vaults that are not ventilated, whereas when we have the pad mounts, they're passively cooled by just being in open air. There's also the purchase and maintenance of the equipment. Subsurface transformers approximately cost 20% more. That's due to the fact that there's only about 2 manufacturers that supply subsurface transformers to the utility right now, as opposed to the pad mount equipment, which is, we have more manufacturers, about approximately 4. The capacity of the system for the transformers allows us to, when we have pad mounted equipment, we're allowed to look at the nameplate rating of the transformer and run it a little bit warmer because we know it's going to have cooling. But when we have subsurface transformers, we generally give them about 80% rating because the hotter we run them, the shorter the lifespan. The other thing that we look at is industry standard. We look to PG&E, Southern California Edison, San Diego Gas and Electric, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, 4 of the largest utilities in California, not only in size, but in customer service. All 4 of these agencies do not use subsurface transformers. They're swapping over to pad-mounted equipment. In this picture, we can illustrate the difference between subsurface equipment and pad-mounted equipment. On the picture to the left, we have a transformer and switching units. What you can see from the transformer in the box is that it's actually in water and it's about 2 feet deep. So when our crews go out to either make a service connection, swap out the transformer, or make switching, they have to work in that environment. Whereas when we work on the pad mount equipment, we have, even though there's still shrubs encroaching, we still have a clear distance behind us to operate and get access to the equipment.
Sorry, can I ask a question? Because these 2 photos side by side bring it to mind. Will the location of the pad mounts be where previously there were subsurface vaults?
We have
or are the pads in different places than the subsurface vaults were?
We have the flexibility to adjust those transformers, not a great range, but they don't have to be directly behind where the existing subsurface vaults are. We have some flexibility in where we can place them.
You can move them a few inches, a few feet,
About
a couple houses
50
down?
to 100 feet. What happens is the farther we move the transformer, then we have to look at the loading on the transformer because we have to supply a certain voltage to each customer. The farther we move the transformer, the lower voltage. And so that's another key factor when we look at moving transformers for our design.
So the existing design that would have, that has certain properties as the places that theoretically there's some flexibility there that the pads could be mounted someplace else?
We have some flexibility.
But you're not necessarily putting the surface mount transformers exactly where the vaults are today.
No, most of the service vaults in Underground District 15 are in sidewalks, so we would not put the pad mount transformers there.
And just to add on, the difference between these 2 as well in terms of our safety requirements. Obviously, on the left in the vault there, we have confined space requirements for safety.
Yeah, it might be interesting just to note that OSHA has requirements for clearance around electrical gear. And I'm not certain that an underground vault situation like the one in the picture on the left meets today's OSHA requirements in any way, shape, or form. Because I think it's something like 2 feet of clearance around switchgear, isn't it? So that might be another.
I think the term is working space, and so if you can't operate the equipment or you have to step on energized parts to get to it, we would look at that as not functionable. So in addition, there's higher maintenance costs for subsurface equipment. In the top picture with the blue, that's one of our elbows that we use for switching. There's corrosion on it. A lot of these vaults accumulate water and heat, which adds to the corrosion. So that's something that we would have to replace. That accelerates our overall cost. the picture of the bottom right has standing water. When we do inspections, we need to pump that water out. But a lot of the times when the vaults accumulate water, it's not just water, it's debris, oils, other chemicals that we then need to dispose of in a special way. We can't just drain it. We have to oil separate it, and that's a process and cost that the utility incurs.
Sorry. I'm sorry, just real briefly. You don't have to go back to the previous slide, but earlier this year we had a lot of discussion on cell towers and undergrounding versus pole mounting of cell phone equipment. And there was some discussion that if you put it underground, they would actually put pumps in there. Is that something that we do too?
We do not put pumps in our subsurface
Okay,
vaults.
for the water, okay.
We would use portables to evacuate the water when necessary to work in the space, but we wouldn't have a stationary pump in the vault.
Correct. And then the picture, yes.
Sorry, just another question, perhaps naive.
No.
But the electrical equipment doesn't suffer from being submerged in water/oil when it's not being inspected? That strikes me as a surprise.
The water and the oils can corrode the tank on the transformer, so that's something that we're also concerned about, yes.
That said, it hasn't happened for the last 45 years in Green Acres.
That's Green Acres.
Well, the elbow in the top right, the blue one, that's Green Acres, and the picture on the left is Green Acres of the equipment, and I think the picture on the right that's a different vault.
What if we ask the question this way? In Palo Alto, has a submerged transformer failed? And was it pretty catastrophic? Yeah, I think that's like, if water gets into that can, it's all over for that transformer, and it's going to be a significant failure and a significant power outage. And if there were people nearby, like working on it, that would be a significant safety hazard. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And when we look at it, we're just talking about underground District 15 for the residential size transformers, but we have much larger transformers that feed commercial customers in downtown. So when we talk about the broad scope of things, that's all, yeah.
That little guy right there, how many kVA is that?
I think that one on the left is 50. I think there's a 50 on the top of it.
50, okay.
Yeah, so it's a
Got
50 kVA.
Okay.
So I'm surprised they can't make vaults that are waterproof, or don't, has that not been the standard?
Well, if it's waterproof, then it's vent-proof, and we can't get any cooling. And so if we run, so that'll heat the transformer and the conductors, and which will cause the failures. So even if we can prevent the water, we still have to deal with the heat.
All right, thanks for answering a uneducated question.
No, there's no uneducated questions.
You're saying it's water cooled.
Was that as well?
We hope not, but. So we'd like to also talk about some of the other options that we have available to us. So the placement and visual screening of the transformer, utility, like you asked about relocating the transformers, how much flexibility do we have in that? We have some leverage in that. And in addition to that, we also have the ability to screen some of the transformers by placing initial plantings to try and hide it so that people don't see it from their front yard or as they're driving by to help protect it. In addition, yep.
Aesthetics take into account where you were proposing to place things in paths?
For our initial design, we never got to the point where we were just showing that we were placing them where the subsurface are currently, but that is, after discussions with the community, that is something we want to do, is we want to find locations for these transformers that will help screen them, make them less noticeable. And so when we look at some of the vaults, when we talk about underground District 15, we have all the secondary connections, all the transformers, all the switching in one box. And what we would need to do for our new current design standards is break that up individually so that if someone's making a service connection, they're not in a situation where they're exposed to high voltage, and if they're changing a transformer, they're not exposed to other switching issues. Some of the cables are very thick because of the insulation, which doesn't allow much bending, so the more confined the space, the less ability we have to work with it. So we need to break it up into different parts. In addition, when we talk about placing pad mount transformers, there's ways we can use larger transformers to daisy chain the transformers to minimize the outages. So it acts kind of like a switch and a transformer, so that if there's any issue, we can switch the transformers, isolate an outage to keep the maximum amount of customers in power as possible while we're fixing the issue. So if there's say there's a cable failure, we can treat that cable failure while keeping our customers in power. So that's why we had some of the larger transformers proposed for the site, but we also have some smaller ones, like even though the ones on Donald Drive are smaller, they're about 15 inches less wide, which is still a significant size difference.
Can I ask a question about it? There was a map that Ed sent around to us today, and it has a whole bunch of black squares on it, and I'm interested in what the black squares are. But there's also, and I went out and drove around, there are also some boxes with triangles in them, and those are above ground now.
Correct.
And so what are the black squares?
Okay, so there's going to be the black squares are either boxes, they're going to be physical boxes in the ground that will have service connections to the residents. So there will be what we call just connections. So the conductors from the meter and the panel of residents will meet in the street there, but we'll also carry conductors back to the transformer. So that's our, yes.
So are these black squares, are these underground, or are they above?
Those are underground. Our conductor, our wire is all underground.
Okay, so the black boxes are all underground, and the boxes with the triangles on it would be the pad mounted.
Correct. The boxes are, the lid is flush with the sidewalk, so we can open the box and get access to the connections. So the black boxes are the flush-mounted boxes in the street, so you might notice one in front of your house in one corner or the other.
So that district you kept it a mix.
Well, we would do the same with underground District 15 as we would do with all our underground districts, because we have to make a final service connection, and we make that final service connection in the street, usually in one corner of the lot. And the other portion runs to the customer's meter and electric service panel.
Again, maybe I didn't understand this map, but where would the new pad-mounted?
Okay, so that was underground District 6, and that's the one where we put the pad-mounted equipment in.
This is not.
That is not the Green Acres
Sorry,
map.
that was put out today because a few commissioners had asked to be able to get addresses and go and see what these pad mounts might look like.
Right.
But no, it's not this district.
Okay.
But still, AC's question, for this map, which is District 6, which is of interest for people trying to understand the situation, what on those maps showed pad-mounted switch and transformer boxes? It's not the black boxes on the map, so what is it on the map?
It's
Boxes with triangles. Circled in red.
it's the box with the square with the triangle in it.
So there are 5 of them in District 6, at least that
There's a
show
little
up on
bit-
this map.
Yeah, right. There's a little bit more because it's not including Wilmer or one of the streets below.
Great, thanks.
But, so I did go drive, so thanks for that map. And I just want to make sure I understand what you just said about the size of those boxes and what's being proposed or what flexibility you have. I thought you said these were a little bit smaller. Did I misunderstand?
No, that's correct. Some of the transformers that we've proposed allow us to eliminate some of the switching units because we can use the transformer for dual functions. Because of that, it has that switching element, it's a little bit wider by about 15 inches compared to the ones on Donald or the ones that you probably saw today.
And what gets removed then?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
What's removed? So if those are bigger, where's the trade-off?
Well, then we would, in some situations, need an additional piece of equipment to do that switching.
So another theoretical design possibility is more boxes that are smaller. Do I have that right? You could do.
Yeah, so kind of we'll get to it in the end. I think we had like another 4.
Why don't we let you continue with more presentation?
Let me just ask one more question about smaller. Inside that can, is it the classic, one big winding next to another big winding? Or is it some weird configuration?
Well, I think there's a photo of one open, and it'll show that there's 2 bushings for the. It's like a pole top transformer. Have you seen one?
What's it look like inside a pole top transformer?
Oh, it's one
It's
winding.
boring, right?
Yes,
It's one
correct.
big winding and another. Okay.
Well, it's one winding with the primary and then the secondary, so it's just one winding.
So I saw once someone wind a transformer in a hexagon pattern. It costs more, but it was about half the size. It was a 3-phase transformer.
Okay.
Which you're using 3-phase transformers, right? Or you're doing single phase?
Only for the residential area, we would use the single phase. If we did a 3-winding transformer, then we would look at, it would be a voltage conversion because it wouldn't be the same.
But that might be something to consider, is a 3, you can, I'll find for you guys the name of the company that makes hexagon-shaped transformers. It's escaping me right now, but it's got hexagon in it.
Okay.
Yeah, and they really are about half the size of a classic 3-phase transformer, which just has the 3 big windings.
Okay.
And then you'd have to do, well, I don't know why you'd necessarily have to do voltage conversion, because I think you might be able to go straight to residential with that, and then branch it out.
When we do 3-phase for commercial, when we wind the core, it's different than how we wind the core for residential areas.
Right.
So when the power to your home, if it's...
Right, I'm with you.
Okay, right. So generally speaking, it's...
Chairman's saying, you're going to go way over the heads
I know,
of most
okay.
people in the room. So let's take this part of the technical thing off.
Sure,
offline
no, absolutely.
And say there may be an angle there to explore.
And it's got hexagon in the name.
We can discuss it further later if you're interested. Yeah.
So kind of talked about some other options here. Again, there was just a preliminary design. We had not got as far as looking at placement and size and options for screening. But I did ask to get some examples of the screening. And so the couple of guys back at Elwell told me to go look at this one on Pina Court. And so I Google mapped it, and I was looking around, and then I marched down, and I asked for one where there was a pad mounted. Where is it? So this is my game called Can You Spot the Transformer?
Behind the hedge, but yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, it's right behind that mailbox. And again, this, there's design options to use these smaller cabinets.
And just for a size comparison, the transformer on the left is a 50 kVA transformer. The transformer on the right is a 75 kVA transformer. They're very similar in size. So when we look at designing capacity for the system, if we're going to go through and rebuild a district, we look at, well, what's the future load expected? How can we prepare for that? And if the transformers are the same size, why can't we put in one that's a little bit more loaded or larger in size, more capacity for the residential? So if there's the expected growth we do expect with the electrification, then the capacity is already available for the residents.
So as I have mentioned or alluded to, there An alternative here would maintain the underground structures. That does require a policy change. Our current standards, for all the reasons that we've mentioned in this presentation, for the safety and reliability and cost, that is our standard. So it would require a change in policy to allow for the underground placement of equipment in these rebuild districts. How, this raises questions. One, how is it paid for? Because it is more costly. Is it going to be collected from residents? Do we use the special facilities fee structure? Is it collected from everybody? What if somebody doesn't want to participate in that? And to just, to bear in mind that if we do this, that going forward, there is the reliability issues for longer, larger outages when they do occur. With any luck, they'll have another 45 years with no outages, but as it was mentioned, this is kind of like current loading, and as we look at electrification of vehicles and maybe even conversion from gas, we expect to see more loading on the system. And it also will impact our ability to kind of get these projects out. They will take longer, take more resources to do it. So we'll be slowing down our rebuild and our undergrounding programs.
So just to give a cost comparison between the pad mount and the subsurface designs, the difference in cost is about $345,000. The difference is when we do the pad mount equipment, we can utilize the existing vaults that are currently there to do our cable pulling and splicing, and the installation of a pad would allow us to have that separation between the transformer and the splicing and the switching of the cables. Whereas if we were to maintain it all subsurface, it would require the installation of a new vault to house the transformer. So that's an extensive project because the vaults are quite expensive, and the excavation and labor to install it is also expensive. We would keep the amount of transformers the same, but if we did the pad mount, we could utilize some of the transformers that also act as a switch, so we could remove some of the switches, which would be less equipment that we'd have to maintain and operate. So the main price difference between the two is the cost of the new vaults for the new transformers, because looking at the pictures showing the switches, the transformers, and low voltage connections, it's too much equipment to operate in one vault, so we'd separate it out by adding a new vault.
So to be clear, the equipment costs in this are based on quotes from the manufacturers?
Correct.
And then there's labor costs assessed for you have an estimate of hours you work with for building a vault and for doing a pad?
I think the estimate for installing the vault was around $25,000 to get our crew to get out there, purchase the vault, excavate, install, add the additional conduit.
Okay.
And in the subsurface proposal or potential design, it's OSHA compliant. Are there still worker safety concerns with that version, or does this design around those so that the clearances are brought up to modern standards and so forth?
We would design it in a way that is safe for our employees. However, our subsurface transformers will always be a hazard, because if there's a catastrophic failure, there's one way it goes. It's a confined space, leaves limited time for our employees to exit or get out of the equipment or the vault, the confined area. That's our main concern with the subsurface equipment, is in the rare event of a catastrophic failure. The transformers are filled with oil, so when they get hot, they get very hot and they cause scalding and burning.
So help us understand that somebody being there because there's a problem with the unit?
When it generally happens under switching, when we're pulling elbows or making connection on the high voltage side, if there's an issue, a fault with the equipment, or for whatever reason, the equipment doesn't act properly, it will arc, energize, and in rare instances, cause the transformer to explode.
You say it's a rare instance. Have there been instances of that in Palo Alto?
Not that I'm aware of. Not here.
Palo Alto's a small data set. I guess if we asked PG&E, they would have instances.
There's been instances in PG&E, Southern California, Edison. It's happened. It's one of the huge reasons why the industry has moved away from them, is for employee safety.
And in those utilities, have there been fatalities?
I can speak to has been in PG&E. And then more recently, just to think about how violent these can be, is that there was an incident maybe about 5-6 years ago where there were some outages that were happening down on Mission Street in San Francisco, where these vaults are underneath a sewer main lid. Think how heavy that is. And these things when these things went, they actually were blown up in the air hundreds of feet and landing on cars. And fortunate enough, there was no injuries to pedestrians. It wasn't that time of the time when pedestrians were out, but how violent these things as they blow, it's pretty dangerous.
I've seen a 500-pound transformer that had, it was about this big, so that happened to be about 200 kVA, so 4 times bigger than the one in the can. It had, that was a 3-phase transformer, so slightly different design, but it had suffered a phase-to-ground fault, short. And by the time that casualty was over and you went and looked at it, phase A was gone. The copper had turned to vapor. Phase B was mostly gone. Most of the copper had gone to vapor. And phase C was mostly still there. And so, I think one of the things that's we're used to things being underground and thinking of them as benign. Cable, it's more or less benign unless somehow it gets cut, because it doesn't store up energy. But the transformer, those windings, those are inductors, and they're going to store up magnetic field energy. And that, one of the things that I think was an important question that we might want to come back to, because obviously the opposite, putting them above ground, now you don't have to worry about them getting wet. When they get wet, the probability of having a face-to-ground fault that's going to cause that transformer to explode in a worst case, I think increases. But I think one of the pieces of data that I know we found studies, because in our brief time here this evening, I found one from Croatia that probably doesn't make us feel any better. But in Croatia, you can have up to 10 microtesla of magnetic field strength from a transformer, and it's deemed to be acceptable by the government. And a very thoughtful study of a transformer that doesn't look shielded to me, meaning I don't think it was in any kind of enclosure the way the ones that are proposed are. By the time you got to 2 meters away, you were at 1 microtesla. But that might be also an interesting set of data, certainly when you think about we're going to put them 20 feet from a bedroom. But a transformer is, it's a serious, it looks very passive, but it's stored up a lot of magnetic field energy in order to do what it does. And so putting them in the safest possible place is really important.
All right, we've had a lot of questions along the way, but why don't we continue with questions? And I want to be mindful that the folks from the neighborhood wanted to, make sure we had specific data on cost, specific data on safety.
If I might add, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, just on that safety point, I think in follow-up to the neighborhood, I would note that we did look for published reports and statistics, and we were not able to find it. The information as presented is largely anecdotal, and perhaps not surprisingly that agencies have not published much information on this, and unfortunately we were not able to provide more objective information.
Well, I'll try to summarize a few thoughts for myself. I think, first of all, as an engineer, one of the things I find to be most frustrating is finding that what used to be a solid solution for me or team members has become less of a solution as time goes along because there's new information. Even today, I saw that there's video on the internet of some poor person that was trying to charge their cell phone on an airplane and got to enjoy having the airplane be evacuated when that little setup of wiring caught on fire. I don't think 5 years ago we gave much thought to charging up cell phones on airplanes, and now all of a sudden we have to. I think we probably all think about our neighborhoods the same way, even though, of course, for you, yours is special. I think we all have values where we say safety's number one, and aesthetics is right there because these are our homes. And value and property value is there as well because these are also our investments. And maybe those move around a little bit, but I bet safety always rises to the top for us. For me, I think about engineering problems most of the day, and I probably wouldn't choose to pay to have a transformer underground next to my house because I know how much water comes down Newell Street when it rains. And I would be very worried that what would happen next would be the transformer would flood, the transformer would fail or explode, and if it failed, one of the things that I think is certainly a growing concern for me is that more and more of us rely for our own health and safety on reliable power. And it could be that my neighbor 2 doors down is an emphysema patient relying on their oxygen equipment in their house, and that's the moment when the power goes out and they happen to be asleep, it fails, and they pass away in the night. That's me. I can certainly imagine some schemes where those transformers might become smaller, and I'll happily follow up on weird packages for how to wire up a transformer into a hexagon where they become a little bit more compact and perhaps less of a concern. I certainly think there are federal standards for magnetic field strength from things that emit electromagnetic radiation. I think that's one of the things we're very fortunate to have in our country, and certainly in the state of California. It will probably take a little bit of digging to find it. It's probably also going to take a little bit of digging to get the 2 or 3 suppliers of transformers to cough up the data on what the magnetic field strength is coming off their transformers. My personal gut feel is that the strength of the fields coming off those transformers, which I do think are shielded, is probably quite a bit lower than what we do to ourselves in other places in our houses. But that's not data, and I think the data ought to be fairly easy to get to. And then lastly, I do think it's sobering to think about what these casualties are like when they do happen. Here I am saying, yeah, put the transformer in my front yard, but that doesn't help you. When you have a person being electrocuted, it's often a very, very severe injury or a fatality, and so it's sobering. None of these things are fun to think about, and you're like, well, then why would I want to have it in my yard? Yet this is the reality we have, and we're trying to figure out how to bring electricity to our homes. We're trying to figure out how to do it in the safest possible way. So those are my quick thoughts.
So I think that the discussion for me has been quite illuminating. I've learned a lot during the discussion. I think I am persuaded that the reasons that the city chose to make the pad-mounted transformers the standard makes sense. But it sounds to me like there is more work that could be done working with the community to see if there are design alternatives I mean, Arnie brought up one using a different kind of transformer that might be smaller. I have lived with a box, a pad-mounted box in my front yard before. I hated it, but after a while, you actually just don't notice it anymore. It's one of those things that when I asked how much it was going to cost to move it, because it wasn't even, for historical reasons, it wasn't even on the lot line. So I wanted to just move it 10 feet to put it on the lot line, which would make it less obtrusive. But it was going to cost so much money that it was not worth doing. But it's one of those things that is just a reality in a lot of places, that these transformers are on pad mounts. I think that if the utilities are planning to do this in a number of additional districts, I think this is a question that's going to continue to come up. And so I think that answering some of the questions about safety that Arnie was touching on, answering questions about design, are things you are going to be faced with. I think it does make sense to pencil out, as you've started to do, what it would cost to do an underground. I think if you were going to do an underground, offer that as a possible option, I think it would be reasonable to ask the residents to shoulder the additional cost, because you are being asked to deviate from the standard.
Lisa, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, a few thoughts. I definitely appreciate what Commissioner Valentine and Commissioner Johnston have already brought up. The thing I'm still struggling to fundamentally understand is the size. I think it was Nina who emailed us some mock-ups based on the residents' understanding of the proposed size of the boxes. And thanks for correcting, there was 32-gallon bins, and I assume that you'd space them apart and those strike me as significantly larger feeling than the photos that Commissioner Danaher just passed me of the boxes driving down Donald Drive. Yeah. And it seems to me pretty crucial to have like painstaking accuracy on the size of the boxes, because it is, if it's 20 feet from your bedroom window, then whether the box is 6 feet long or 4 feet long or 2 feet high or 3 feet high or 4 feet high is, I think, really important. So I don't know if it's possible to get that tonight, but I just wanted to call out that it seems really pivotal to have, like I said, painstaking accuracy on the proposed size and on design alternatives, if there are alternatives on that size.
If it's helpful, perhaps I could provide a little bit of clarity on that.
Sure.
So the photos from Donald Drive do reflect slightly smaller than, as Greg described, the maximum size that had been proposed in the Green Acres neighborhood. The boxes on Donald are 34 inches tall by 44 inches wide and 33 inches deep.
34 by 44
by 33.
By 33.
The boxes that have been proposed, again, this is the maximum that provide both the switch and the transformer, are 38 inches tall by 48 inches wide and 39 inches deep. So roughly 4 inches taller, 4 inches wider, and 6 inches deeper. Now, that said, I would note, and with all due respect to Nina, the vantage point by which the photos that she provided largely reflect kind of a eye-level height of the cabinet, which suggests you have to be at 38 inches off the ground in order to get that vantage point.
Are you saying she's a realtor? No.
No, there is a vantage point from which those photos were shot. And I think that does give the impression of a box, again, that you're looking at eye height. And so unless you're 38 inches tall, that you'd have to actually be crouching a bit in order to get that angle.
Thanks for providing that. I think that it remains as an exercise to somebody like me to try to figure out how to experience that in person. The other thing that I guess I wanted to point out was it did say in the staff report, I mean, we haven't talked a lot about section B3 and regulation 3. I thought it was interesting that Jeff Hoyle brought up in his comments, sort of trying to get into the mindset of city council back in 1996 when this was changed. But the report does point out that at the time that city council made that decision, there was not an expectation that the existing underground districts would need to be rebuilt.
Correct.
So I just think it's worth pointing out that it doesn't necessarily feel like that when that resolution was made, that this particular circumstance had been thought through. I think that's worth noting. And then also, I just was curious about because again, I feel like size is really important, and I forget, in some of the input that we got from residents was sort of calling out the difference between easement and right-of-way, and I actually myself don't know what the difference is there, but I'm curious about if anybody on staff can speak to sort of like what is the mechanism by which the utility or the city sort of has the right to put stuff on residents' property, and are there any limits to that, either in size or, you know, I can imagine other things that sort of encroach on people's property, like sound, or if it was a piece of equipment that the lights were on all the time, or, you know, sort of disturbing people's sense of ownership of their lot. And I'm curious if anybody can speak to that.
Sure. Greg, do you want to speak to the specifics of the right-of-way in Green Acres?
So right-of-way is public right-of-way, so that is land property owned by the city. And an easement would be the property owner, private property owner, would grant the utility access to place equipment on there. So in this situation, we're proposing to put the utility equipment in public right-of-way, not on private property.
Okay, that's a super huge distinction, because in the mock-ups, aren't the 32-gallon bins with the sheet over them, like in the middle of somebody's lawn? Am I missing it? So those mock-ups are inaccurate in that
We would place
sense.
them behind sidewalk.
There's a 5-foot section behind the sidewalk that is right-of-way.
Lisa, I think
That's not actually owned by the homeowner,
Correct.
but they feel like it's part of their yard, they maintain it, they probably irrigate it, et cetera. But
Correct.
technically, the city owns that.
Correct.
Lisa,
Not the
it's the difference between some neighborhoods, there's the street, and then there's a strip of land, and then there's a sidewalk. But in this area, there's no strip of land between the sidewalk and the street,
Right.
right? And so the right-of-way is on
the other side of the
property
si-
owner's side
okay.
of the sidewalk.
All right, thanks for clarifying that. And how big is that strip, how big is that right-of-way?
5 feet behind sidewalk.
I
It's
see.
5 feet. Yes.
Okay, thanks.
All right, yes, I second a lot of what you've already heard. And I will say, it's disappointing that we're having a lot of these factual conversations today after having had so much time with the neighbors, and some of these questions I feel should have already been known to everyone, and especially the size of the transformers, and maybe a couple options, knowing that you have a group who is most concerned about, not mostly, but very concerned about aesthetics, that they don't even know what they'll be looking at is disappointing. And I think we could have saved a lot of time tonight if some of that had been investigated and disclosed before.
I do want to address that it was very clear in our conversations with neighbors that there was no discussion, or no interest in discussion of, say, minimizing the size. It was basically looking for options that did not involve above-ground cabinets.
Okay, I don't want to bring up,
We're not going to get it.
yeah, I don't want to, I'm just noting that there's a lot of discussion that's going on that I would have hoped would have been resolved earlier. And then I guess I'm also interested in different options and sizes for the pad-mounted transformers. My gut tells me that safety still has to be number one, but I think we can accommodate some aesthetics while still getting to those, or I hope we can, while still getting to those safety concerns.
I don't have much to add to what Commissioner's already said, other than we had a meeting to work with the residents, and it's pretty obvious from the comments we had today, we have a lot more to go. I would hope that the staff shows a lot of flexibility to work with the residents to address their concerns in implementing this.
All right, so thoughts come in buckets, and it's hard to trade them off sometimes. One bucket is cost. Clearly, it costs more. Jeff, I'll speak up. Thank you for the signals. Clearly, it costs more. If that were the only consideration, I'm conscious of the 85% of the residents who have overhead wires, and we're going slowly on those. And if we were rebuilding things and paying extra amounts as a city to keep it underground, I would think, and when it comes to my district, I'd feel the same way, that that's something that would be shared by the residents, is the extra costs, and it could be done in some long-term payment, I don't know, 10-year or whatever assessment. Or that's how I would feel would be fair, given the other 85% of the residents in the city. I don't think cost is the main issue. On aesthetics, these are not pretty boxes, and I wouldn't want one in my yard. I may have one at some point. I did go through Donald. It's a lovely neighborhood. It's lovely without all the wires there and the big streets, and there aren't that many boxes. It took me a while to find the first one, and I looked at that, and gee, I'd rather not have that next to my driveway if I were there, but it didn't greatly diminish the quality of the neighborhood, I thought. I think if, and we'll talk about safety in a second, if we end up having to do above-ground boxes, there has to be a real attention to the value of aesthetics, which would be size, placement, screening, decoration, anything that could be thought about. It can't be given short shrift at all. And because these are beautiful homes, beautiful neighborhood, high property values. If it were just cost and aesthetics, I'd say put it underground. Commissioner Ballantyne's comments about safety kind of shook me. And I'm thinking about if my nephew is an engineer, we're working in one of those with danger of electrocution or worse, I wouldn't take that trivially. And it mattered to me to hear that all the major utilities in the state have treated above ground as the standard now, and that some of them have had incidents. I think that's important, and maybe worth looking into, get a little more data on that. The small data set represented by Palo Alto doesn't have statistical significance, but the decisions by these major utilities, I think is important. Were it not for the safety issue, I'd want to put them below ground, accept the extra cost, find a way to spread that over time, and do it in an equitable fashion. Given the safety issue and perhaps wanting to learn more, my inclination is for staff to work and see what are the best possible solutions on aesthetics, all the different parameters of that. And I was reassured that the District 15 was a really lovely neighborhood. It didn't, you know, those things aren't pretty, but they didn't destroy the neighborhood. So, I don't know, for me, I think safety may be the overriding thing, but maybe there's more to be heard on that. I also think notwithstanding, we could talk about policy. This may be a policy that was adopted 22 years ago. Jeff, thank you for digging that up. We can always count on you. I really appreciate that. If we have a lot of districts to be redone and people will have similar concerns about aesthetics, maybe that could go back to the council again with time to revisit, after 22 years, knowing that it's going to affect another 12,000 households, well, I forgot how many households, 2,500 so far have to be rebuilt, and in the future, others as we roll that out, just to reaffirm or change the policy. But at the moment, I'm leaning towards safety being the key criteria, and if that's the case, then working really hard to find the best aesthetic situation. As I said, I don't know what order mine is on there, but it looked like it might have been on your map for the redoing there. So I'm thinking about it from that point of view as well. Ed, without having to come to a resolution tonight, because you have, schedule allows more time to study this, right? Think about it?
Yes, certainly. We can do some additional homework. Obviously, as has been referenced, any additional information we can glean on the safety issues might be helpful for the discussions. And again, to Commissioner's points, more than happy to have staff look more specifically and work with the neighborhoods at the smaller options, as well as location and aesthetic treatments that can be undertaken.
And there's two parts to the safety thing as well. What's the worker safety, which is important, and then came out somewhat around the edges in the comments, is there a safety issue with having it above ground? Is there a risk of explosion or something like that? I understand that it's cooled, so that doesn't have that problem, but maybe the vendors could provide data, or maybe we could ask some of these other utilities what their experience has been. And I'm keeping in mind that...
magnetic field strength, too.
The magnetic field strength.
I did, by the way, now find the limit in New York, which again doesn't help us. But New York's more permissive than Croatia.
So, fellow commissioners, if we left it without a resolution, but request to hear a little more on the safety, and perhaps a little more direct feedback on that from the other utilities, and on what might be done on aesthetics, is that the best we could do for tonight? I think. I want, we've spent nearly 2.5 hours on the subject, so we don't treat it as a light issue, and we'll have a little more chance to talk about it further. Do I see assent on that? So we'll leave this as unfinished business. And I apologize to the staff. I know you've done a lot of work, but I also know that you care about how the residents feel and want to make sure we get to the right decision. Council member.
I don't think I have much to add other than my thought process was pretty similar to Chair Danaher's on listening to all this. And so I really feel like I learned a lot tonight, which I appreciate, both the neighbors and the staff. I mean, I think what you've got here is something of a constrained problem. And I think, I feel like I got a better understanding of where sort of the sides of the polygon are, right, that we have to work within. The only thing I would say on the safety thing, and I think, certainly it's useful to go get more data, but at some level, we're all of us together in some way, shape, or form going to make a qualitative decision on this, not a quantitative one. And certainly to all indications, the likelihood of a catastrophic accident that we're talking about here are pretty remote, right? And so there's that. But then on the other hand, if we were to proceed down here and actually somebody got hurt, right? Then we all feel terrible. And I don't, how exactly you weigh that when there's probably not a quantitative answer to. So,
yeah, well said. All right. So thank you, everybody, for coming and sharing your thoughts. There'll be another chance to address this issue. And commission members who've not had a chance to go through that neighborhood, it's worth a few minutes when you have an opportunity on that. All right. Greg and Debbie, thank you very much. All right. So we took a lot of our evening for that, but it's an important topic, and I think it needs to be dealt with carefully.
If I can interrupt the chair, I apologize for this being so regular, but the caretaker for my wife with Alzheimer's leaves at 10 today. And the one item I really wanted to check on what was happening is we list next scheduled meeting as September 5th, but my understanding is we have a workshop on August 28th on resiliency.
Yes. That's correct. Is it 28th? Is that the date?
That's correct.
Okay.
You should, that's right. We listed our regular meeting, but we should have listed that workshop on your upcoming docket.
So we will have both meetings?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Since it's already almost 9:30, we have two topics, the natural gas capital improvement plan and discussion of the recycled water. And I was just looking for the rolling calendar. I don't know if it's practical to put either of those off for the...
We certainly could. I would note that number 2, the natural gas CIP, was really as a courtesy stop with the UAC. This was actually requested by the Finance Committee, so we will be reporting on that as a follow-up to the budget approval by the council. So we could actually drop that item.
Sorry, the Finance Committee requested that the UAC hear it, or they just requested that report and you're keeping us in the loop?
Correct, the latter. So the Finance Committee will hear that item really as a follow-up to its budget approval.
I thought there were some interesting statistics in here about the size of this. Commissioners, does anybody want to hear the presentation for educational purposes? Future purposes, because we don't need to cancel that, but okay. Would it be all right then if we dispensed with that item? All right, and
Dress up in that. Sorry, man. I'm sure he won't be disappointed. I should introduce, if you don't mind, Aaron Perkins, who is our gas engineer, senior gas engineer, who was both planning here to present the item, but is also our lead engineer on the downtown project, so our University Avenue Joint Trench. So he is up late tonight.
Oh, okay. Well, why don't we get Aaron for 5 minutes here to get to meet him here and a few questions. All right?
Are we saying that we are going to talk about the recycled water plan tonight?
Well, that's the next question.
Okay.
Yeah.
My own suggestion would be to try to get through natural gas tonight and save recycled water for the next meeting. That's my personal preference.
Does that affect the staff schedule or anything, or is that?
Okay, so we do have, we may have more time sensitivity to the recycled discussion. Okay, we've also got.
Okay.
Okay. So
we'll continue with that then if it's going to cause, yeah.
It would be, yes, preferable from a staff perspective.
All right.
So we can send Aaron on his way.
Well, Aaron, let's just spend. So you're the one responsible for downtown, and yet you show your face in public. Is that that?
Yeah, it's very impressive.
Do you have any idea how hard it is to get from?
Yes. Trying to get out of there as quickly as possible.
Aaron, the presentation was very, very clear, and I appreciate the technical background for us. I'm sorry we kept you waiting here, and
good experience.
You don't live in District 6, do you? Oh, yeah, thank you.
All right, at the Commission's pleasure, we'll launch in with recycled water.
All right.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Carla Daly. I'm a Senior Resource Planner in Utilities, and I'm going to try and go quickly since it's getting late. I know Commissioner Trumbull has to leave, but I did want to just make one overarching comment. Anytime we talk about water in Palo Alto and in California, it's a complicated subject, and it's also a subject that takes a lot of coordination and collaboration with many different people within the city and outside. We do have our consultants with Woodward & Kern who have been helping us on this project here tonight to support us, as well as some of my colleagues in Public Works who are located out at the Regional Water Quality Control Plant. The Santa Clara Valley Water District has also committed a lot of resources to working on these problems. We don't have anyone from the district here with us tonight, but they've been an integral part of this process. So with that, I will launch in. Skip over the agenda. So just a little background on recycled water, since it's a subject that doesn't come to you as often as some of the other subjects do. Our treatment plant, the Regional Water Quality Control Plant, is producing more recycled water than we use right now. It is a high-quality, drought-proof, locally controlled, non-potable supply. The idea of the Phase 3 expansion, which we'll talk about much more tonight, originally was proposed in the 1992 Recycled Water Master Plan, so this idea has been around for a very long time. And again, as we'll talk about more, it's basically a pipeline up to the Stanford Research Park. In September of 2015, Council approved an EIR for that project. Most recycled water projects do not include an EIR. We went way above and beyond by producing that document for this project. And at the time that we brought that EIR certification to Council, Council made it very, very clear that they didn't want to see a proposal to build that project without looking at a very broad range of alternatives for recycled water. And so that's kind of the background on how we got to where we are today with this larger Northwest County Recycled Water Strategic Plan that Phase 3 is one part of. I would also note there's another project that you may hear about and Council will hear about, and that is a relatively small advanced water purification system. It's a reverse osmosis system that we are working toward building to reduce the salinity of the recycled water that we produce right now. There have been salinity concerns about that water, and so this is a system that would take a slipstream of the water, take it down to 0 total dissolved salts, and then blend back 50-50 with the regular recycled water. So we're calling that enhanced recycled water. I bring it up just because it is it's a project that we're going to do regardless of Phase 3, but Phase 3 would not be possible without that additional project.
3 years ago, there were a lot of discussions in parts per million dissolved.
Yes, yes. Council's heard a lot about that. You've probably heard some of it too, but Council's heard much about that. So the Northwest County Recycled Water Strategic Plan, which the Santa Clara Valley Water District is a partner with us on developing, has a few different parts to it. The Phase 3 pipeline is one piece of it, and that includes producing a 30% pre-design for that pipeline, the business plan, which is the subject of tonight's meeting, and identifying and applying for funding. Other parts of the strategic plan include a high-level look at indirect potable reuse, and that is taking purified water, injecting it, and then giving it some residual time to move through the aquifer and withdrawing that water and using it for potable use, and also a high-level assessment of direct potable reuse. So that is producing purified water and injecting that water directly into a distribution system. We're also including in the strategic plan a high-level look at where demands for this recycled water might be outside of our service territory. So Stanford University, Los Altos, possibly East Palo Alto, Menlo Park. And again, this is because Council, when we took the EIR to them, really made it clear they wanted to see a big picture view of water reuse and what the possibilities for that supply source are. This is kind of a graphic view of a lot of the different activities going on around recycled water. It's not completely all-inclusive, but gives you an idea of all the different parts that are moving around. I would draw your attention to just a couple. On the the left-hand side, that advanced water purification system, that was the project I was talking about just a minute ago to bring the total dissolved solids of the recycled water down to an acceptable level. On the right side, a couple of clarifications. The potable water supply resource planning, that's referring to our water integrated resources plan. We did do a version of that a couple of years ago, but we will redo that once we have a better picture of the recycled water alternative. So it says completed, but it's only sort of temporarily completed. And then the Mountain View expansion and Sunnyvale tie-in says completed. The study of doing that tie-in is completed, but the tie-in itself is not completed, so didn't want that to be misleading. So the center section is the work that Woodward and Kern is helping us with, and we are focused tonight on the top bubble, the Phase 3 business plan. So this is a look at the map. The red pipeline is existing today, so most of the water is going down toward Mountain View, but we do serve the golf course and Greer Park and some other city facilities. The green pipeline is the Phase 3 project that we're talking about today. The alignment is more or less the same as it's been since back in 1992, although it's been tweaked a little bit given current customer locations and demands. And then we added that tiny little blue spur on the top center sort of section of the map over to the new Baylands Athletic Center that's behind the golf course.
Carla,
yes,
just,
sir.
On the map, is it because Stanford's academic territory isn't doing something, or is that just outside of your perspective on this? Because the academic lands didn't show any use of recycled water.
So Stanford has been not enthusiastic about recycled water. They are concerned about the groundwater, and even though Stanford's been concerned about recycled water and not showing a lot of interest in using it on their campus. I'll just leave it at that, I think.
But they're okay to use it in the research park?
The research park is City of Palo Alto territory, service territory, and a lot, and please jump in, my friends in Public Works, if I say anything wrong, but most of, if not all of the reason that we did the very extensive EIR was to address Stanford Real Estate's concerns about recycled water being used in the research park, and also why we are building the reverse osmosis system to reduce the TDS level of the water. The Phase 3 design overview basically connects to that Phase 2 transmission line, the red line that we saw on the map. It's about 10 miles of distribution and transmission lines. There are 2 pump stations, one at the plant and one at around Page Mill and El Camino. There are about 200 customer connections, including Mitchell Park, Coverly, and a cemetery, in addition to all of the commercial customers at Stanford Research Park. The demand is about 1,000 acre-feet per year. That represents about 10% of Palo Alto's potable water demand, and the estimated cost is around $3,000 an acre-foot. Construction cost is estimated to be $36.8 million. Total capital costs around $44-45 million. when looking at trying to assess the attractiveness of this project, we tallied up the costs versus the benefits, and you, without reading through all of those, you can see what all of them are. I would point out the one that we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about tonight is on the benefits side, and this is this concept of system reliability enhancement. And the idea behind that is that even though you may be a customer who doesn't physically receive recycled water on your property or to be used in your industrial process, that everyone on the system benefits from recycled water being used in the service territory for a number of reasons, which we'll talk about a little bit more. But that's the one benefit that's not, I think, self-explanatory. So I wanted to jump a little bit to the issue of funding at a cost of $45 million. Clearly, funding is an important topic. The state revolving fund is a source of funding that we think we have a very good chance of getting. It's that is a low-interest loan. It is half of the state's rate for general obligation bonds. It's right around 1.8% right now. We have not applied for it because we need to do some more environmental work in order to finish that application. We think that'll cost about $150,000, and we didn't want to ask for that money before having a better feel for how likely this project is to move forward. The other source of funding are state and federal grants. The federal WIN program, which is a part of Title 16, and I can never remember what WIN stands for, but it's a federal water-related grant. We did apply for that in 2017 and were rejected, and we were told by the feds that our project was too small and with no agricultural interests nor disadvantaged community being served, that it was unlikely to score well in future funding events as well. So we're not holding a lot of hope out for a federal grant, but the state funding does look promising. So recycled water, not surprisingly, is very consistent with the city's sustainability goals. I won't belabor this, but it is called out in the SCAP as a specific strategy to investigate all uses for this water. There are also a number of project benefits that I alluded to a bit earlier. We're reducing our demand for potable water. This whole concept of sort of use the right water for the right use falls into this category. It is an additional renewable supply. It can enhance landscaping for recreation and aesthetics. It's also a source that helps us keep our valuable urban tree canopy vibrant. It's a locally controlled resource, and it alleviates pressure on the Tuolumne River, which came up earlier tonight as well. So we did do a preliminary rate study around this project. Right now, we don't charge a rate for this water because all the water used in Palo Alto is used by city facilities. And so we've never really treated this pipeline as a utility with paying ratepayers. Should we extend the pipeline up to the Stanford Research Park and add these 200 customers, it would look more like a utility, and we would have a rate schedule for it. We have not done a full cost of service study. We will have to do that eventually, but we tried to just take a high-level look at how we would manage rates for this water. Typically in California, recycled water rates run around 60 to 90% of an agency's potable rates. We have an interesting nuance on this system that at the terminus of the pipeline is a cemetery, which is a very large user of water, as you can imagine, because that's what they do, is water grass. But that customer is not our customer. They pump groundwater, so they are a customer of the Santa Clara Valley Water District, and their rates are much lower than Palo Alto's. So we considered a scenario in which the cemetery was using recycled water but not adversely economically impacted by using that recycled water. And that result is around charging everyone on the system 60% of Palo Alto's potable water rates. So given that self-imposed constraint, we also want to investigate what a scaled-back project would look like that doesn't extend all the way to that customer. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next steps, but that's why that is one of our next steps. It has to do with this preliminary rate study and the reality of that customer's situation. So back to the reliability enhancement concept. And again, this is the idea that all potable ratepayers benefit from recycled water, even though they might not be using it directly. We tried to quantify what that benefit divided by use, so reliability rate, looks like under various funding scenarios. And so you can see sort of the extremes over onto the left with no external funding. The amount that reliability rate would need to be is quite high, in the range of $150 to $200 an acre foot. And then over on the far right with a federal grant, which we don't think is very likely, and a state loan to make up the rest of the balance, that rate gets down to around $50 an acre foot. And knowing that there are a lot of variables that are uncertain, we ran some scenario analysis using Monte Carlo simulations to try and see what the possible values of that reliability rate could be for different points in time. So you can see that in 2030, the most likely reliability rate is around $100 an acre foot, with the bell curve on either side.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you define what is a reliability rate or a reliability enhancement rate?
So it would be the amount of money that the potable water users are paying toward the recycled water pipeline project.
Terry, thanks very much. So I cut you off. Do I say that again, make sure we understood correctly? Yeah, the amount of...
It's the amount of money that the potable water users would pay toward the cost of the recycled water project.
Why is the word reliability in there?
Because conceptually, the reliability of the remaining potable water goes up with the reduction in pressure on imported supplies.
Let me try it a different way. This reduces demand for potable water. So in electrons, we call it negawatts, right? So this is megawatt, I guess. But so it's the equivalent of increasing our supply of potable water by that amount. So you're saying it's, in that case, Monte Carlo is $100 per acre foot for increasing our supply of potable water.
Correct, sort of, yeah. I mean, we're decreasing the demand for potable water.
Megawatts.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, let's
When you decrease the demand for potable water, then don't potable water rates go up? I mean, I've kind of learned that lesson over the last 3 years.
So in the short term, that can happen with the drought. Over the long term, I just want to reemphasize it. Over the long term, with efficiency, bills tend to go down. We could talk about that more at a financial planning discussion. The exact impact on potable water rates was taken into account in this study in sort of a preliminary way, and that's why one of the follow-up tasks is to really dial in on that and figure out exactly what the difference would be. But it's taken into account in the costs and benefits of that study, and the amount that potable water rates would go up is the reliability rate. That's what that number means. Am I accurately representing that?
Yes, that sounds accurate. Okay. We accounted for the lost potable revenue, which it's only lost potable revenue until you start redesigning the.
Introduce yourself and speak at the mic.
So one of our costs that we accounted for was the lost potable revenue, because you're not selling that water to the potable water customers anymore, which at the beginning shows up as a loss of revenue, but over time that would be worked into your rate design for the potable water rates once you have a recycled water rate table as well. So initially it shows up as a loss, but it eventually would be worked into the rates, and then you would see it as a higher rate. But
And could you introduce yourself for the record?
yes, I'm Carrie Del Baccio with Woodard and Kern.
Councilmember Phillips.
Okay, I'll ask this now. I was going to ask it later. I understand the argument, and it makes sense. But it seems a little bit paradoxical, because if I understand the thrust of this is that the use, because it increases the total water supply, but the use of the potable water is to primarily for landscaping for commercial and public buildings, if I understand that right. Or that's a big part of it.
Sorry, were you saying for the not recycled water? Or
For the recycled water. Right. So the time that increasing the potable water supply, the total water supply, is going to be valuable is if there's an extended drought again, right? On the other hand, if there's an extended drought, surely the first thing to get cut is landscaping for commercial and public buildings. So the increase in supply seems, maybe it is, maybe it's not, right, in practice. That's all.
I think one of the things so I think you're on your understanding's correct, but I think it's also worth remembering that some of the facilities that are being served here do have public benefit, and we're like playing fields, for example, were a regular source of discussion during the drought, and also the impacts on the tree canopy that were also something we talked a lot about in the drought. That's something that's protected through the use of recycled water to some extent.
That makes sense. There'll be some of that we would
So how does
probably
this
want to
affect
do
the
anyway.
tree canopy?
If you're able to preserve irrigation during a drought in the areas that are served by recycled water, it'll have benefits to there won't be as much stress on the tree canopy. In those areas.
You would have to be watering the trees with recycled water.
Right.
Right. It's not fungible.
And I saw the reference to it earlier about getting it all the way to being potable water. Is that simply prohibitively expensive, or? Because then that will close the loop and solve that problem.
Yeah, so that's a task that's not finished yet. We're still assessing those other alternatives, and so that's one of the reasons we're not at a point where we can make any sort of recommendation on this project, because we are looking at those other alternatives, and we'll compare this project against a whole bunch of other ideas for water reuse before we're ready to make any sort of recommendation.
Sorry, one more question.
Like, why do I keep getting to the wrong place?
It occurs to me to ask if in other areas that have recycled water projects with paying customers, which I guess we haven't had yet because the city's been its own customer, is there ever observed a phenomenon in which, because the water's cheaper, the customers use more? or because the water is guilt-free, the customers use more or don't cut down their use during a drought? Is that a thing, or am I just making that up?
Are we concerned about conserving the recycled?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. Yeah, is there a reason to be, yeah, I guess we'd turn that around and.
Well, right, or I guess another related question is, well, I'm just wondering, trying to wrap my head around sort of the scenarios that might occur in the future and how they would affect the business plan positively or negatively. I guess another question I have is the recycled water isn't, I assume there's not a great storage facility. So as it's generated, it needs to be used or it's discarded. So it'd be another, in a drought scenario, I mean, I'm assuming that the commercial facilities that were buying recycled water, there'd be very little incentive for them to cut down because the water's there, and if they don't use it to water their landscaping, it's going to get poured into the bay. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's correct.
Okay.
Are there rules against using evaporative chillers in drought conditions? Because I've seen them here and there around the Bay Area, and it would strike me that what does the evaporative chiller care if it's getting recycled water compared to if it's getting potable water?
I'm not sure about evaporative chillers specifically. We do have industrial cooling towers and other facilities. They do react differently to the recycled water because they run on the number of cycles until they concentrate the TDS. So if you're delivering them a higher TDS water, they do actually use more water than typically if you're delivering them a potable water.
Okay, that makes sense.
But I don't know that I don't remember seeing during the drought any restrictions on.
There definitely weren't restrictions on that during the last drought.
Yeah.
I mean, I can imagine. I mean, if I was a person with a chiller like that, and I knew that I could buy lower cost water, I'd probably just put an upstream filter on it and take the TDS out myself, get the less expensive water, and then I run my chiller all I wanted during the drought. So that might be a customer offtake scheme for you that would be beneficial in a drought.
That's a great idea. Thanks.
So it's too early to do the cost modeling on what the amortized cost per year of this. You've got some assumptions in there based on your Monte Carlo and that, but it'll depend a lot on what you find out about the financing. But looking at the $45 million total cost, are there alternative ways to use that money to save water? Have we considered that at all?
Right. Right. So all of these alternatives will be, the end of this strategic plan will identify the best alternatives for water reuse, and then those need to be wrapped back into the Water Integrated Resources Plan, which does consider conservation, and we never lose our focus on conservation. If that's where you were going, I'm not sure if you were going with that question or not, but regardless of how much conservation we do, we still are interested in reducing our dependence on imported supplies, and I think it's fair to say that we're not going to get there with just conservation alone, that we're going to need to find some other, we also have, the thing about recycled water is we also have an incentive not to put all this water into the bay, because our regional water quality control plant is surely facing more restrictive regulations on nutrient loading in the bay, and so there's that additional incentive to try and find a good beneficial use for that water. Although some of it will still need to go into the bay. There are environmental reasons to put that water into the bay as well. So there's a sweet spot somewhere in there of how much is going to the bay and how much is being reused. But in addition to the water supply aspect of this supply source, there's another reason to find some place to use it.
And I think what you're asking is this the most effective use of $45 million? And like Carla was saying, and maybe it's even two questions. So like Carla was saying, there's the recycled, there's the treatment plant discharge, and we're doing the recycled water strategic plan to discover what's the most cost effective way to use that water. And then when we get into water supply planning, we look at conservation and other sorts of uses, other sorts of ways of saving water, which, I mean, could range even wider, right, into things like on-site non-potable reuse or stormwater capture or things like that.
It's a slightly different side of the cost question. So on the map where the lines are, is that digging and putting in a whole new set of pipes that'll be for
Yes.
recycle? And has there been any thought into both, can you know, if we ever get there, to sync that up with other projects? And also, right now, it looks like it's the most direct route, but would a less direct route give more opportunity down the road for future customers? That might make sense.
So we did look at a fairly wide swath of possible customers to pick up and tried to pick up as many as we possibly could.
Yeah, our goal has been to optimize getting as many customers with the shortest lengths of pipe. And then what we did in this phase with the 30% design aspect is actually go through and figure out what were going to be the most challenging crossings within the city. So going under Caltrain, going under Highway 101, some of those things are very challenging construction. And so sometimes the route is not as direct as you would want it to be because you have to manage those other challenges within the city. But I feel that we've put the work in to find and optimize the system. There's always, I'm sure, more optimization that can be done, or phasing, different ways to implement.
Should I keep going?
What are the next steps in your work with this project and interaction with the council, with us on this? What do you
Right, so I actually wasn't quite done with the presentation.
Sorry. You're looking at us like you were,
I didn't know if you still had more questions or if you wanted me to keep going.
You go ahead, please.
So a couple of things. One is, or three things actually. The first is potential mitigation strategies. Yeah, we haven't done a full cost of service study. We might have an opportunity to have a rate higher than 60% of our potable rate. That was the assumption that we used in this business plan, but that is not set in stone. We also are looking at ways to expand use beyond the current alignment for phase 3, so into Los Altos, into East Palo Alto, Stanford, even though they haven't been super enthusiastic. The other is to look for alternative uses for the project facilities. So, and again, this is part of that larger Northwest County Recycled Water Strategic Plan scope. Is there a way to use part of this pipeline once it's built for indirect potable reuse later into the future? Or is this pipeline somehow useful in the potable reuse scenario? So we're looking at all of those alternatives to see if we did build this pipeline, are there strategic ways to use that asset in the future for some of these other scenarios that we don't know how they're going to unfold yet. So next steps are to evaluate that scaled down project that stops short of going all the way to the cemetery.
And would that evaluation include trying to figure out where you'd be able to price the recycled water if you didn't have that 60% cap?
Yeah. And, I would add that, part of that evaluation is also seeing where the opportunities to expand distribution of that water might lie beyond the current terminus of the pipeline. So if there's a for instance, a huge interest in Los Altos, and getting all the way to the cemetery gets us closer to Los Altos, then that makes building the full project look more interesting. So those things need to be taken into account. The second next step, to your point, do a rigorous cost of service study and refine all the projections for revenue and update the cost versus benefit calculation. Continue evaluating those additional uses that could be served with recycled water from the project. Oh my gosh, I'm having so many problems with this. Why is this not? There it goes. Evaluate incorporating these facilities into that future IPR scenario that I talked about, or into a direct potable reuse type of project, and then completing the rest of the strategic plan to see how this project compares to other recycled water use alternatives before making any sort of recommendation on moving forward with this. So I think that was it. And so mostly we want your feedback on just your reaction to the steps that we're taking, how we're thinking about this. We did, I think, hear some good feedback on the idea of the reliability rate, and we definitely wanted to hear that from you tonight. Any other thoughts that you have on the work that we're doing on this, we'd really appreciate.
I had one question. I think I saw somewhere there is at least a possibility of a stranded asset, and if there's anything that can be done to minimize the risk of that.
Right, so that goes to the idea of, would this pipeline be useful, for instance, in an indirect potable reuse project later on? So if we built it to serve non-potable water, does it get us to a location in the city whereby sometime in the future we could produce purified water and then use this asset to get it to an area where injection wells make sense, given the structure of the aquifer and time that the water needs to be underground and all of those more scientific questions. So trying to see if there are potential futures for this piece of metal in the ground that would serve us in other futures.
Please, you got your light on?
Well, one of the big questions, obviously, is what this reliability enhancement fee would be on users of all potable water. And I see in the presentation you're estimating a 3 or 4% increase on existing rates, and that strikes me as something that would be okay. I think if it was going to be more than that, that would people would start to have issue with it.
It might be a little bit crazy, but if you could get to the point where you had a solar-powered upgrading station for your recycled water, I mean, just recycle it in batches in the daytime. Then I could actually imagine how you could have a benefit for local solar, which is always the one that's tough for me. Because then the local solar could power the upgrading plant regardless of what's going on. The grid could be dead. It would keep working. And then it could drive the pumps to pump the water up into your tanks on the hill that then come back down into the main supply. And, look, if astronauts can figure out how to recycle their water, I'm sure there's enough filtration that you can do to make the water all the way to potable grade. It's just, it's got a cost to it. And I would imagine usually you have your fixed capital cost after that. It's very energetic. But if you drove it all with solar power in the daytime, then maybe it starts to look a little better.
Have you done a net present value calculation for this project?
Yes.
And can you share the figure?
So the business plan, I'm not sure if they were provided a copy of the entire business plan. They were. So there's a whole chapter 3 that's got the economics of all of the benefits and all of the costs summarized by net present value at the very end. And it includes ranges for things where there could be a 0 benefit up to maybe a value.
Let's see where that is.
After that chapter, Carla.
I'm getting
Unless you're in the appendix. Oh, you're in the appendix.
I have to say, I think this is the first time we've gotten Monte Carlo simulations.
You can thank my colleague Randy Rains for coming up with that. It should be 3, or 3 at 1.6. Yeah.
Yeah, no one.
Yeah, it's table 3.1 and 3.2 on page 3-6.
Just for the record, I was noting that I believe we did Monte Carlo simulations for the hydro rate adjuster. Not too distant past.
I retract my statement. This is the second time we've.
I think when we, I'm not against this at all, but I think when we look at it and you get the cost modeling, you get more data on that, it might help to put a little more in the context of a percentage this represents of water saved over total use in normal times and in drought times and severe drought times. In my sense, we've had this discussion before, that as weather patterns get worse, water scarcer, the value of this is going to be higher and higher. But putting it in that context so we can see just what percentage of the available water this represents may make the argument better. Well, 10% based on a normal year, right? What would it be in a drought
Based on
year?
today's uses, so, which are projected to stay pretty consistent for the next 10, 15 years or so, but you're right. I mean, under a severe cutback,
or where we were 2 years ago,
the percentage would be a lot higher.
Closer to 15% or something. We had a 30% reduction in Palo water usage.
Yeah, probably that's probably close. I mean, 30% is what we saved, so yeah, it would be a higher percentage under those conditions. We are hoping for your October meeting to bring back an item looking at these broader alternatives under the larger strategic plan. And so, I mean, hopefully spending time looking at this project in detail will help that discussion move along more quickly now that we've all had this background and can then compare this to all of those other alternatives that we're going to be bringing to you.
Yeah, that would be welcome, I'm sure. Is that on the rolling calendar? Or maybe, if not, you can put it on there. Yeah.
All right, so we'll make sure we add that to the rolling calendar.
Commissioners, further comments or questions for?
Sorry, having just had a close look at the tables in section 3.5, just to clarify, the reliability fund is what potable water customers would be charged in the proposed possible rates per acre foot or per CCF. And are there constraints on, or could the utility sort of set that where it needed to set it to get it to pencil out? Or are there external factors that determine how much revenue would come into the reliability enhancement fund?
So I would say two things about that. One, all rates will need to be based on cost of service, it is also common practice to include some costs for recycled water borne by potable water ratepayers within service territories.
So sorry, just to belabor the point. So the range from 0 to $200 million is the full spectrum of what's, like, is there a bell curve over that? Like, where's the sort of expected, given what's done in other projects, what back of the envelope one might predict? That was that number there. Okay.
Right.
It's all coming together.
So this is the bell curve at different points in time for what that rate would need to be.
And sorry, which rate corresponds to $200 million NPV and which rate corresponds to, if I can guess which one corresponds to 0?
So the net present value tables represent one point on these bell curves. Maybe the farthest extreme 2 points, I should say.
I guess, put another way, for since that's the biggest variable, the reliability fund in the table has a $200 million range. Every other number is like 0 to 12, 0 to 4 million, 0 to 10 million. So what would be the price per acre foot or price per CCF that would, let's say you steer everything else down the middle, that would be required
that
to
might
have
be
it
in
be
the
NPV?
Sorry, there's a second set of tables that uses one snapshot example and sets a specific reliability rate. That might be, it should be, Carla, just following the.
So maybe this goes to your question on page 3-5, final paragraph, the range for the reliability rate is $0 to $700 per acre foot. And as far as the bell curve goes, that's what 700 is on the very far upper end, in fact, way off the tail on the more likely bell curve that you're seeing up there on the screen.
I'm just trying to get at what would be the likely impact to potable ratepayers that would make it pencil out as sort of 0 or slightly positive NPV?
4%. Right?
That's all I'm getting at.
About $150 an acre foot.
Okay.
Which is an equivalent to, as Commissioner Johnson
That's
said,
the 3 to 4%. Okay,
yeah.
thank you. Sorry to belabor that.
No, sorry, yeah.
It's a little confusing.
Ask a question?
No, I'm just thinking, in a drought, let's suppose we had a 40% reduction, the marginal value of having an extra 10% of water, or 10 on top of 60, is pretty high. It doesn't show up in these numbers, but it's, yeah. The value depends on scarcity, right? Not just cost per acre foot. Councilmember.
I liked Arnie's comment about maybe there's some other uses for recycled water than landscaping. Maybe we can use it for industrial chillers or something like that, because still thinking about sort of, we're talking about the reliability rate to ratepayers and so forth, but who ought to be paying for this? Because if in practice, if we can use it to water our trees, that's one thing, but if in practice most of it's going to get used by HP to water their lawn in a drought, okay, then it seems like HP ought to be paying for it, not ratepayers, right? And I know when this gets to finance, one of my colleagues will ask exactly that question, right? So So it seems to me that because the 60% seems like an artificial kind of thing. We're saying, well, if it's more than 60%, nobody will use it, okay? But then there's sort of, a reciprocal question to that, right? So I'm still sort of thinking about the dynamics of, who is appropriate to pay for it.
Right. Actually, what we're saying is above 60%, the cemetery is economically adversely impacted.
Of course, you could go back and charge the cemetery, tell them they can't pump groundwater anymore. And
You could.
I did want to point out that we are hooking up the industrial customers that are along the alignment with recycled water. There's just, irrigation greatly outweighs that.
well, I think if somehow the use could be, turning it into potable water at some point in the chain, right? That's big value, right? But at the moment, given that its applicability is somewhat limited, then I think you got to sort of go and look, is it really appropriate that we should charge everybody, right, for this? Right? And how do we get around that?
It might just be really, what if every swimming pool had to be filled with this water? Obviously, everyone's going to say, well, I don't want to swim in it. And that's going to get you right back to the TDS and other specifications on the water, and you're just going to end up building a little purification plant right there at every swimming pool. Now, every swimming pool already has a purification plant, because if everybody swam in the water, it wouldn't stay clean. So it's not really that big a deal for the swimming pool to deal with different water. It's just a different arrangement. They're filtering the water all the time anyway, right? And I agree it changed their economics, but that might be, okay, yeah, you could do it, but it costs you $1 million. But then
It's actually against the law to use recycled water in swimming pools, so that's not a use that we can consider.
But if you can upgrade it to potable, why can't you put it in a swimming pool? I don't get it. If I can drink it, why can't I swim in it?
Well, if we upgrade it to potable, then we're talking about potable reuse, and that's a different project. But that's not what this is. This is non-potable.
I get it, but why does the upgrading have to be on your end? Why can't the upgrading happen at the swimming pool, and then somehow you certify it, it's now potable, and I put it in the pool?
There's a distribution issue.
What? What's the distribution issue?
You need a separate set of pipes to get it.
I got that. So over there at Rinconada, it came up the pipe that comes, one of your green lines that's running up towards wherever, right? And I tap off, and we take some little part of Rinconada Park that, it's the part nobody likes. It's like over in the corner. And we build a little set of filters, and we filter that water all the way up to potable grade, just like the astronauts do. And it gets inspected quarterly, or whatever the rules might be, and it goes right into the swimming pool. Why is that?
You're talking about on-site direct potable reuse. I'm not sure that we've thought about that. Maybe that's something that we can just take as an idea and see if it's something that plays into the recycled water strategic plan.
You put the local solar panels right there.
Yeah, anything you can do to broaden the application to stuff that's more core than HP watering their lawn in a drought, has got to help.
So I think there are maybe two avenues to tackling the issue you're talking about, Councilmember Filseth. And I think first is completing the recycled water strategic plan to see what's the most cost-effective use for the recycled water. And then the second is, we've looked at two outside funding sources. That may not be the universe of funding sources we might be able to tap. They're not, there aren't huge lists, but there may be it may be that we need to look hard for other funding sources if that's going to be a high sensitivity.
But again, it's Arnie's sort of looking for creative ideas to get outside the box too.
There's two of us drank seawater quite a bit.
Any more comments or questions on that? All right, well, thank you, folks, for that. The last agenda item was topics for future discussion. If anybody wants to make a quick suggestion, we'll deal with that. Otherwise, we'll save it for the next meeting. Requests, wish lists? Plenty coming up. At some point, report to us, if you would, please, on this new California law about solar for new homes and how that relates to Palo Alto, and does it make sense? Okay. Carla, thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Actually, the public comment we had from BAWSCA, to me, is completely out of context, and I would love to understand it. I don't know if that's an agenda item, or if you guys can just point us to...
It does relate to the Bay Delta plan that I mentioned will be coming to the council in an upcoming agenda, so we'll be able to provide some context for that.
Cool, thanks.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
All in favor? All right, we're done. Thank you, everybody.